Mary and Joe show. It's exactly what it sounds like. Basically, sharing a bit of the Canna lifestyle with the coffee talk. You'll hear interviews, reviews on products, a bit of my own personal life experiences, and sharing on YouTube for over 10 years now, being active on the internet with my own chronic illnesses, and many interviews in the future, along with a dose of a normalcy. We are a community around the world, and I bring you this podcast to give you a normal place to enjoy your Mary and your Joe. Hello, everybody. Welcome. If you're just joining, thank you so much for joining today. You are listening to your host from the Mary and Joe Show podcast. We are running solo tonight. You are listening to MsChronicChronicles, also known as Rachel Raw Truth. You can also find me on Facebook, Twitch, Miss CC Tweets on Twitter as well. And if you're joining tonight, please make sure you say hi in the comments. I am going to be going over some more fantastic content tonight related to the wild western slope of Colorado. We will be reviewing some old videos, continuing some new interesting content, and I will also be, of course, showcasing the very awesome, let me share it real quick, fantastic PDF from my local Historians of Parachute, Colorado, Battlement, Mesa, originally known early days of Grand Valley, Colorado. So we will be reading on page 20 today, along with sharing some other content historically about Glenwood Springs in particular, because in my last podcast that we fell off on, which was a 3-hour podcast. So if you guys joined me in that, I appreciate all of you. It was pretty eye-opening to learn so much about the chief, Colorado of the Ute Indians, along with some of the water power and Denver's control over the metropolitan, and also opium use that was very big, the opium dens that happened in Denver, Colorado. Tonight, we're going to follow up with some other content, along with where is the history of the historically known teddy bear from Teddy Roosevelt, and some other great things about the canyon, the rail systems in Glenwood Springs, the hot springs, well known. The reason I think these are very important to discuss the pioneer side, not just of Parachute, Colorado itself, but is to actually paint a picture for my listeners. So tonight, my co-host, Tuki Rue and Marie Tarot 504 are out doing fun adventures. They'll join us hopefully on Monday. But for all of you that are listening tonight, please grab your Mary and your Joe. If you're just joining me, let me say hi to everybody. Hopefully you're going to start joining in the chat. So it's a little chill night tonight. I have a I rolled it, but I have a little joint ready to go here. It is some Snowball and some Speakeasy from the awesome I call it the dispensary recreational of Kind Castle. Thank you guys for always hooking me up with great products. I do shop around town. We will be talking about some future episodes on that because I have a High Times kit review that I will be talking about with edibles that I did recently. And it's almost the end of August. It's so crazy. We've done such a great month, me and my co-host. I'm very excited to see where we go. If you guys don't know, this is a 5-year plan. So get ready for all the episodes. That's why we are breaking them up in such nice little bites for everyone. I think that the best idea, let me make sure I start off right. Hold on. Let me pull this a little bit bigger. I'm getting my PDF ready for this evening. Hopefully you guys can see it with me pretty good. And I am going to go as long as I can tonight as well. So let me see here. I think I might be done with page 20, but we're going to find out. So if you don't know, take a look at the comments below and then scroll down to the description area. You can open up that tab. I do put the PDF link, which I do encourage you guys. It's called Least We Forget. It is over 173 pages we will be going over, along with visuals, audio, all the fun things. I will be kind of giving you guys a mashup of everything you should know about this area. And in general, it's pretty exciting to see it all come together on my podcast. So let me make sure I know where I left off in the last one. Let's see. All right, I believe that was it. Yes. So yes, it says it's page 19, but actually page, let me make sure, 11? Okay. So we will finish off on that little part and then we'll go to the other one. All right. So what I do want to leave off on, if you have seen the last episode, I did link quite a bit. Let me give you guys a visual of that. If you're listening tonight, do say hello. Let me know what you're smoking on. For all my cannabis smokers in the chat, this is a podcast that is reflected on your Mary and your Joe. Some of you guys just drink tea instead of your coffee, and that's fine too. You know, whatever you're recreationally using or medicinally in this moment. Thank you for joining me tonight. This thing keeps going out though. It is so fresh. So hold on one second. And then I wanted to show you guys like the prices that exist in the area that I live. We will talk about that at the end of this podcast, just for the ones who want to know. Let's see here. We want to look at this real quick. So in my last episode, if you guys checked it out, it is the Wild West, Western Colorado, episode 2. I put a ton of links below if you can see that. So I'm pretty excited. We're going to go into Doc Holliday. Some of these were not actually brought up in the last one, but the train robbery in Garfield County, that will be coming up too. So this is kind of an actual intro to some of it. Now, the Colorado Experience, Western Water, we did touch on that. So I'm going to go ahead and bring that up in the next planned showcase. Let me pull this up. Pretty excited. Hold on a second. Glenwood Springs history. All right. It's another great one. All right, here we go. So, let's see. Should we go on to the next? Hello there, everyone. Let's see here. Setting it all up, guys. I'm setting it all up. Do you like my intro? Let me know in the comments. I will be featuring that at the beginning of our podcast so that people kind of get a little feel of what we're talking about. It's a little bit of everything. Sometimes topics you never thought we'd bring up. Okay, so let me get this queued up. The waterway. We're going to be talking about that, and then we're going to be talking about the rail system. So let me pull that also up. Pretty excited to discuss how the railroad system happened in our lovely area. And Doc Holliday, I believe we're going to be discussing. Here we go. And the Haunted Hotel of Colorado. Hotel Colorado. Here we go. Okay, so we're just going to pull these up right away. I think it was the original Coloradian. That's one of them I wanted to pull up tonight because we had not quite finished it completely, but almost there. Here we go. So let's start with this one tonight. I do believe this is a good one because it still discusses quite the importance of our Ute Indians. We must remember. So let me pull that up real quick. And remember, this is a review, reaction, and a history lesson in its mixture of all the areas in the description or in the title of this video, as you see. It's a multi-series part podcast. So I do expect you guys to have to kind of take it all in if you listen to all the parts. Let's see. Western Colorado. There it is. Let's do this. Okay. You ready, guys? Let's get in it. All right.
As soon as I hear the drum, immediately the European people say the Indian people on the warpath. So they banned a lot of it. And a lot of these ceremonies that was banned, a lot of the people did it under the blanket, meaning that they did it secretly in the mountains or wherever they thought they might not be watched. And that some of these people that were caught were put in prison and also hanged or shot. And a lot of these things that I'm saying right now is not put in history, but that's what we went through to survive, to hang on to some of our ceremonies.
By the time of the Pikes Peak Gold Rush in
Sorry about that, guys.
1859, the Ute people had established themselves for centuries in the Rocky Mountains. And that meant that initially, at least, the Ute people were able to avoid serious confrontations with the Americans. But of course, the gold and the silver is really locked in the Rocky Mountains. And it wasn't long before Americans began to invade Ute territory in search of riches.
Now, in our last podcast episode, we did discuss in particular, I even think we did touch on this, but I would like to elaborate on the importance of what we really did do to these wonderful people, which is unfortunate because if you look at the history we're about to read tonight in our PDF, there's a major statement that will be painted by the end of this podcast. So I do encourage you guys to really digest some of the things we share tonight. Some of it will be intriguing, some of it will be heartbreaking, some of it will be enlightening, some of it will be funny. That is what I like to share here. So we do have a commentary in between.
People would be here probably until midsummer, then they'd move to higher ground. So if you came in here when the Ute people were out, you'd be standing on the hill saying, "It's a nice valley. There's nobody here. Boy, I could, farm and I could do this." And they move in, establish itself. And so 6 months later, here comes the Ute say, "What are you doing here?" "Oh, this is open ground. There's nobody here. Nobody's using it. Nobody's using this ground, so I'm going to use it. It's going to be mine."
And this is literally what we keep discussing, is it was literally like this for these natives. The indigenous people would come back to their regular areas. And as we learned in the last podcast of Parachute, of its Grand Valley nature, we had the original pioneers to the area that came in and were able to be at least friends with the Utes. But there was a vast reality to all of it, is that we took their land when they were away. It is reality.
This was part of the migration pattern and the camps that the Utes had. And that happened all over Colorado. And so they lost a lot of good campsites and beautiful areas.
By 1849 and thereafter, up until 1880, there was a removal of all the Utes from the Front Range and also from the San Luis Valley. 1868 was the time that they established the reservation on the western part of Colorado, which was almost 1/3 of the western part of Colorado.
Chief Ouray was appointed and selected as a spokesperson for the Utes, for all of the Utes.
They didn't have one chief, they had many leaders, and he was identified by the non-Indians as a chief because they needed someone to negotiate with.
And I feel like this is so important for us to remember, what did Chief Colorado do for the Western Slope? He was the negotiator. He was also the peacemaker. If you really think about what we heard in the original story with the watermelon. If you didn't get that episode under your belt, please go take a look at the last episode. I find it very humbling. As of the last time that I have read the PDF, truthfully has made me see my land totally different that I live in now. And I want you guys to really, really understand how beautiful it really can be to digest the history of where you're living.
And since he spoke several different languages, he seemed to be the logical person to negotiate with.
And I think that Chief Ouray was called upon to bring not only peace, but to try some more understanding as to what these government policies, which he may have been just told about the day before. and to try to decipher that into a Ute language, or any tribal indigenous language, which just doesn't compute all across the board. I mean, that had to have been a very daunting task.
It makes my heart hurt to know that these people were literally taken for, if you look at the reality of it. We will be touching on, let me pull up this one as well. Russian water is the next one we're going to discuss today. I think this is approximately, hold on, wait a minute. Here we go. Nope, that's not the one. Let me pull this one up. And hang tight, everybody. We're going to keep playing this one. I'm going to pull the other one up.
Decisions on behalf of the Ute tribe that were not in consensus with other Ute leaders, and in fact, very often negotiated away lands that were not his to negotiate away. Many Ute people then and now saw Ouray as a collaborator, as somebody who was giving up Ute rights in exchange for an uncertain future.
The Bruno Agreement was in 1874, but prior to that, gold was discovered in the mountains. Miners started coming in and stealing our gold and silver. And so instead of compensating us, they said, we will give you 3 million square acres that's going to be yours forever. But the miners got into it and they said, no, we're going to downsize your reservation to what it is now, but you can still hunt in this 1 million square acres. Hunt.
This was not a negotiation. It was an ultimatum that the Utes were to give up their claims to the San Juan Mountains, the silvery San Juans where Aspen and Silverton and other very rich silver mining areas existed. These were traditional hunting areas.
And this is where I am located. I'm about 45 minutes from Aspen, give or take an hour, let's say 45 minutes to Glenwood Springs. Glenwood Springs to Aspen is that whole beautiful Mecca you are looking at currently. We will be going and diving so much more into these mountains this evening. I'm so excited to share it with you guys. I hope you guys are listening. Definitely say hello. Give us a thumbs up if you're enjoying this video. All the resources to the videos you see and hear tonight, if you're listening on the podcast, or if you are watching here on YouTube or elsewhere, please let me know in the comments. Thank you guys so much for checking that out tonight.
For the Ute people, they had, since time out of mind, traveled to the San Juans in the summertime to hunt for deer and elk. But now they were told that they had to move away. They were allowed to keep the far western strip of Colorado, the far western third of Colorado. This was a real blow to the sense of the Ute people's sovereignty, of their sense of governing themselves.
Well, they call it Meeker massacre, but in my heart, I don't believe it was a massacre.
Was really the first onset of establishing a Ute reservation in Colorado and appointing the Indian agent Nathan Meeker, who came from Greeley, Colorado, as the Indian agent.
Meeker shouldn't have been there at all. He shouldn't have been an agent. And I think it was because he was so indebted that he looked for ways to make money in order to pay off his debts.
He had reinvented himself as a self-appointed expert on Indian affairs in the United States. And he would go around the country lecturing about this is his words, the intellectual inferiority of American Indians, and how if they could just be convinced to give up their, what he would say, savage ways and take up farming, maybe in time they would adopt civilization.
It's mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing. And this is what we know. This is what we are given a little taste of. But we're going to stop it right now at 1814, and we're going to jump over to another video real quick. We did not finish on the last episode, and I do think it's exciting and a good step in the next direction to bring this conversation. I hope you guys are enjoying tonight. Share screen. Let's see. Now, I'm actually bringing it back, just a little taste back to what I was talking about at the beginning of this podcast, related to Denver and the opioid dens that were actually real communities that were incorporating opium as just a natural way to enjoy just no different than saloons in a sense. So you will see the interestingness here.
Chinese communities was often used as an excuse to drive the Chinese out of town. By 1880, there was a national hysteria against the Chinese.
There was such hostility towards the Chinese in Colorado and the West because, well, they're very industrious and hardworking.
And they were resented because they seemed so alien to American culture.
And in 1880, a young man died. The coroner said that he died from typhoid, but he said some of this could have been caused or could have been linked to the fact that he took opium for pain. And so once the newspapers got hold of this, the headlines just flared. And this, of course, roused the population more and more, and there was a lot of anti-Chinese sentiment.
On Halloween of 1880, a fight broke out in a pool hall in what's today lower downtown Denver between Chinese and non-Chinese, and it spread into a brawl throughout the city. The brawl was ultimately fed by anti-Chinese hysteria and by a desire to close down the Joss houses in Denver's Chinatown.
Well, now we have whites who rampage to the Chinese district. They are beating Chinese in the street. They lynch an elderly Chinese man from a lamppost. They're looting and burning Chinese businesses and homes.
They destroyed the Joss houses and drove the Chinese out of the neighborhood.
What saves the Chinese from annihilation? They fled to the brothels. We have newspaper accounts. The girls in the brothels taken in the Chinese, holding back the mobs with cocked revolvers, waving champagne bottles over that. Yeah, you just come across that threshold. So if it wasn't for the girls in the brothels, we'd have a lot more loss of life.
The mayor called out the fire department and he called out the police department. They were unable to do anything about it at that time. And finally, the militia had to be called in, and the whole thing settled down after a couple of days.
The anti-Chinese riot of 1880 did very little to stop the opium trade in Denver. Joss House.
It's mind-blowing if you think of the mentality of allowing it to come, and then the mentality of the community that to help one another. It's very, very interesting. I don't think Colorado really thinks about, even us citizens here, everyday citizens here, don't really think about, the history at its finest. We really just think of the small things. Like what we will be talking about in a moment is, I want to blow your guys' minds when we talk about the Glenwood Springs Canyon Highway and how it was constructed. We're also going to bring up, let me bring this up too, because I think that one is ready to go. The rail history. Here we go. I believe this is a good one to probably pull up. Let's do this because it's very important. And then we're going to one more. Let me pull this back up.
Houses reopened almost immediately. It wasn't until the late 19-teens when federal regulations began to clamp down on the illicit opium trade and drive it underground. The Joss houses closed in the 19-teens, but they were replaced by a black market for opium and stronger opiates like heroin and morphine. Along with opium and whiskey, coca leaves were viewed in the late 1800s as another kind of medicine and stimulant.
Cocaine came from the leaves of the coca plant, which came from the Andes in South America, and then made its way up here as a medicine.
Native American people in South America had been chewing coca leaves as a mild stimulant since time out of mind. But in the 1880s, scientists learned how to distill the active ingredients of coca leaves into a powdered form that we know today as cocaine.
So it would be used rubbing on the skin, perhaps applying with a Q-tip on a bad toothache or something like that. But it also was available over the counter, and there were some manufacturers who actually supplied the whole kit and caboodle for use.
It's so insane to know that it was so actively available for people, and we don't think about that too. So you're thinking, it's insane. Okay, let's take your mind. Let's take your mind. Let's take your mind. I like to mash it up here. So let me make sure this is ready to go. Yes, it is. Let me stop sharing that for a moment. This is in relationship to Glenwood Springs, and I'm very excited to read this because we will get another little idea of the the feeling of how it used to be here. So Glenwood Springs, formerly known as Defiance. Here we go. The speedy side of town. Exchange sample
Trains
room.
first rolled into Glenwood Springs in 1887, creating easier access in the town, which in turn created a boom. This brought in all types of characters, starting with the working class, and then later, on the other side of the tracks, the wealthy.
Now, if we just take that into account, I mean, that is literally how many large cities seem to be constructed, as we will see in a pattern of studying these things. I have noticed that kind of still exists a little bit in Glenwood, not so much, but if we think about up the canyon, that still exists in a stereotype, because the closer you get to Aspen, the higher quality of a property you may own or a vehicle you have parked in your driveway. That's just a fact. So this is going to be interesting to see, and this was I'm going to give a shout out to Visit Glenwood Springs. This is obviously wonderful content. Was released August 3rd, 2017. So shout out, we will give them a thumbs up. Go give them a thumbs up, subscribe. We will be putting all the links below.
Hold your hand out, naughty boy. Hold your hand out.
Glenwood's seedier history happened when it first began here. In 1800s, the early 1800s, Carbonate was a place where a big mining boom was going to happen, and that was up on the flat tops. And it brought in miners and all kinds of people. And it was supposed to be the seat for Garfield County at that time.
So you guys will hear me mention Garfield County regularly, and in the documents we're going to read tonight, you guys also will recognize the term Garfield County. Now, I think it's important for us to keep in mind that these are stories historically that all make the bigger picture. So let's enjoy and unbox this great little nugget tonight about Glenwood Springs, Grand Junction, and the rest of the canyon on the way to Utah.
But with the cold winters and stuff, they realized they couldn't do it up there. So they brought everything down to Glenwood. And when they did that, Glenwood started growing, and it became like a tent city. And along the riverfront were lots of saloons.
Wow, to even understand, I know how windy it is here. I know how rugged it is here. I know what kind of bugs. Poor lady. This poor lady right here. Let me just say, God, a bug, if it got stuck in my tooling of skirt, I would not be a happy little camper. Holy crap, the ruggedness. I so respect this, and I want you guys to really take it in, because when we read the documents tonight from the PDF, I think it will really give a really tasteful view of the history of these mountains.
And hotels, of course, brothels, because the women started coming in to service the miners and the agricultural men, the farmers. Gussie Blake was the first madam in Glenwood Springs. And
goodness, Bussie Blake. We're going to have to do a little showcase on Bussie. Oh, gee, Bussie. I wish will it let me go back a few seconds. I want to play this part again. I want to hear Bussie Blake. Is that her name? I lost my pen, people. There it is. See, this is what I love. I love researching people, and I love understanding this town a little bit more. Let's do it again. Here we go.
The first madam in Glenwood Springs. And she was the common law wife of John Blake, who was a founding father of the town. She and John built a 2-story house on the corner of Riverfront and Bennett Avenue, and that was her brothel. The red light district in Glenwood was basically 7th Street, and that was from Cooper avenue to up to Lookout Mountain. What happened was in 1887.
I will take you guys on a little joy ride. I almost dropped my phone. And I will showcase these areas, do a little bit of the 2-day history for you viewers. I have a lot of lovely locals listening, and I encourage you guys, if you guys have any suggestions to research, please put them in the comments below. I cannot wait to learn more about our history.
When the trains came to Glenwood Springs, the trains brought business and things started booming, but it also brought really the scum of the earth as well. And I'm not saying that prostitutes were the scum of the earth, but they did come in droves here. And so they had brothels all the way down 7th Street. You could just jump off the train and go to the brothel. What cleaned up the town was in 1916 when Prohibition began here in Colorado. It was the first, it was.
So 1916 is actually earlier than 1920s that we know of. In the history of Colorado in itself, I have said this from the very first episode on Colorado, that the brothels were very important to our cities here. And I don't think people quite understand. It's not a made-up fantasy. It was a part of society and business. Technically still very, very, very active in this world. It's just called OnlyFans now, guys. You have digital escorting and you have real life escorting that existed in a house, like a bunny ranch. It's what it is. So, the brothels, I think, are really big part of these major cities we'll see in a regular pattern, not just these western areas, but port cities, big cities. The adult industry has been around for a long time, folks. Long time.
Early, Colorado started Prohibition. So the saloons turned from serving liquor to soft drinks and candy and stuff like that. And so that was really the decline of the prostitution in Glenwood. In 1893 is when the Hotel Colorado was being built, fashioned after a villa in Italy. It was.
I can't wait to show you guys the inside of the hotel. They've really done well about keeping it historic. I will give them that. I am very grateful for Glenwood and their historic society. I have been to Italy. I have seen many of the architecture. I think the location is incredible, how they were able to build on the side of the mountain. But these are early days, beautiful construction in our mountainside. So if you ever get a chance to come to Glenwood Springs, please stay at the Hotel Colorado. But as you will learn tonight, it is haunted. So be prepared.
Being built by a man by the name of Devereaux, very involved in that. They wanted to make Glenwood a resort tourist area with bringing in lots of money and amazing guests.
So we believe that the hotels had an important part of the history of Glenwood, from kind of picking up the pieces after the Prohibition to providing economic jobs and revitalization when times were tough. Recently, the hotel and brew pub have been kind of the cornerstone of the redevelopment of 7th Street and Restaurant Row in Glenwood Springs. The general history of the Hotel Denver is that it was started down the street in the late 1800s by a man named Art Kendrick. And in 1905, Henry Bosco rented the top floor of what was then a saloon and started the Star Rooms. And it's been owned by the Bosco family since 1905. We ended up acquiring it in 1991.
That's very interesting. If you ever come to Glenwood Springs, one of the first things that are just very prominent is obviously the little bridge. They've done recent construction on it. If you're not a local, then you probably don't know what I'm talking about. But if you are a local, you remember the bridge was a lot more open. You could see over the edge. And I feel like this hotel has so much energy. I wouldn't say it's just spiritual. It's just that, not like a ghost feeling, more so of like you can feel the energy of excitement that this was a very important building along with Hotel Colorado. That is just so it's so, if you've ever been to Hotel California, it's the same thing of this amazing structure. There's so much love put into those walls, and we'll learn about the history of Hotel Colorado tonight, which is quite interesting.
During the harder times of the Prohibition and the Great Depression, the hotels basically hung on for dear life. They was not nearly as busy. It was a popular area for people to buy grapes for their own wineries from Mr. Bosco, uh, where they made their own wine at home. You can do that during the Prohibition. Some of the more famous guests of the Hotel Denver include Diamond Jack, who came to Colorado accused. He was basically a convicted felon of kidnapping and murder. One of the other more famous guests of the Hotel Denver was apparently Clark Gable, the actor from Gone with the Wind. He liked to come out in the 30s and go fishing for a week, as I understand it. The role of the hotel in the history of Glenwood Springs has been kind of a comfort area for the blue collar workers, as the common man's hotel to stay in. They had a wonderful restaurant here at the hotel that everybody talks about.
I think it's just a beautiful hotel in general. If you like vintage, anything, if you like history, they really have preserved it in the most lovely ways. From a child's point of view, I feel like you can walk into time. Recently, a friend of mine went to the Glenwood Springs Hotel, Colorado, and spent the night in one of the major rooms. I hope we have her on for an interview, and hopefully she'll give her personal experience. We actually experienced her catching some ghosts on camera in just a short period of time walking through the halls. So I feel like what we're going to view tonight is very interesting, not just the city alone, but like the buildings, how much, like I keep saying, love has been put into the walls.
The hotel across the river, the Hotel Colorado, was the luxurious hotel, and the common folk really didn't feel comfortable there or could afford it. That's the biggest role of the Hotel Denver in the history. We think the Hotel Denver is still kind of the common folk place that my wife April's done a wonderful job of converting the hotel into a boutique hotel that is very comfortable for people, but not so ritzy that you feel uncomfortable. The hotel is a 68-room boutique hotel. At one time during its heyday, it was 100 rooms. But we've slowly converted it to where it's down to 68 rooms. We consider them boutique rooms. A lot of them look like the lobby here in the atrium. They have exposed bricks in the rooms. We have exposed ceilings in the rooms, quilts, hardwood floors.
It really does remind me of the French Quarter from the facade on the outside as well. We're going to dive into another fantastic, let's see if we're going to miss anything. The rest of this, I will encourage you guys to take a look at the link. I will throw it into the comments right now. Hopefully you guys can get it. Who knows, if you will, who knows? That will help some of you guys to explore some of these lovely places. Let's get into the next awesome video. So I want to dive next into, how did the canyon happen? Like, what was this beautiful stretch? It's exciting. Let's go there. I think this is the video. Hopefully it is. If it isn't, I will jump over and we'll bring it back up. I feel like it's such an exciting thing to explore some of these visuals before we actually dive into the PDF, because that's a more of a sit back and relax experience. But for some of you who like to take the journey with me, thank you all for joining me tonight.
Interstate 70.
Hold on.
Worried about the way that the highway department was going to protect Glenwood Canyon.
Let me fix
The
this.
Glenwood project was well founded. There was a reason to be worried about the way that the highway department was going to protect Glenwood Canyon.
Interstate 70 through Glenwood Canyon is probably one of the most spectacular stretches of interstate in the country.
I-70, interestingly enough, is one of those Ute trails. Most major highways in the United States are Indian trails.
It could be a postcard. You don't even notice that the highway is there, and that's how well built it was.
When you look at Glenwood Canyon, it is stunningly beautiful, but stunningly harsh. And so the logistics of traveling through it were elusive forever.
I really think that that's a well said statement. That's one of my favorite parts of the canyon, but if you're tired, it is not something you take from Denver with an altitude change that happens so drastically from the elevation from someone who has experience driving these canyons. I'm sure as hell glad I've learned how to drive out here, but it's helped me in other places, I'll say that. And then having hurricane experience driving in Louisiana and flooding, and oil slick roads in California, Colorado really taught me how to do that. I had one friend when I was growing up, shout out to James, who taught me how to drive on a mountainside in Grand Junction with a brand new car back in the early 2000s. And he just put the car in neutral and got out of the car and let it start rolling down the hill. And he's like, if you want to learn how to drive, get in the seat. And this is it. If you see these incredible, and I did, I got in the seat. But these are the incredible cliffs and incredible sights you see here. This is a great, I think, representation really visually for what we're going to describe in this PDF tonight.
This program was made possible by the
supporting projects throughout the state. Interpret Colorado's architectural and archaeological treasures.
We're getting there.
additional funding provided.
I'm grateful for you, PBS. Grateful for you. And members like you.
Thanks to the Denver.
All right, let's get there, guys. Let's get there. Isn't that gorgeous?
These organizations.
I wonder if we're going to have some time tonight to touch on the mob in Colorado. It's exciting. We have some amazing Denver concepts I think we should throw out there for a future episode, but it's exciting to take a little bite. You're coming here all to enjoy the history, right? Here we go. We're about to start this lovely journey in the Colorado experience.
You people have been here for time immemorial. That's what our creation story tells us. We don't have a migration story. We have three sister tribes, the Southern Ute, Ute Mountain, and the Ute Indian tribe of the Uinta-Norre Indian Reservation. 11 to 13 bands comprise the three Ute tribes. When the government came out and moved us to reservations, they separated those bands, but we are sister tribes because we are all from those original bands. And when we all come together, we are referred to as the Ute Nation.
After the ratification of the Ute Removal Act in 1880, the U.S. Army.
I will start referring to the Ute Nation properly because I feel like this is honestly what it comes down to, is to correcting ourselves and reflecting on the history of our area when it comes to these Ute tribes that literally had their land removed from them. So I am going to throw this link in the chat right now just so everybody can get excited about it. If you want to go check it out yourself, I feel like it's exciting to share these links with everyone. And please say hello in the chat if you're listening.
Army began forcefully removing the Ute tribes to reservations. This gave the U.S. government access to the valuable land and resources always held by the Ute people. In western Colorado, a significant cultural landscape was appropriated. and transformed into an essential transportation corridor.
Glenwood Canyon connects western Colorado and eastern Colorado together. Just after you cross the Continental Divide, you go through a series of mesas and plateaus and valleys, and eventually you reach this massive canyon. And it forms this barrier, really blocks western Colorado and eastern Colorado.
Glenwood Canyon was significant to Native peoples for the hot springs. There's
Yeah, most of you don't realize that. We have such medicinal properties in our natural mountainsides. And then when you include these hot springs, holy crap, it's worth it for the beauty. It's not just mental, it's physical.
a medicinal and a ceremonial use of those types of features. There are many ute trails that crisscross across the flat tops coming down into Glenwood Canyon. There are also very significant sites within the canyon itself. Most major highways in the United States are Indian trails. I-70 is one of those ute trails. Why?
I feel like it's really important to put that out there. We're not realizing that, people. We take it so for granted. We take it so for granted. Now when you're on the interstate, now when you're at these roads and you're driving through there, you're just listening to your music, you're not thinking too much. I hope you guys really reflect. Take a look around. And these are the same views of the same mountains that these Indian tribes were actually enjoying.
Why? Because the Indian people would follow the animals who would take the easiest route to get somewhere. And so we would walk along those trails because it was the easiest way to get from point A to point B. The highways in the United States follow those trails for the very same reason.
In the 1860s, Denver was looking at a way to connect their bustling city to the rest of the country. So they looked west. They actually had dreams of creating a wagon system all the way to California. But the mountains are there. These incredible canyons are there. It's incredibly difficult to do.
Mining prospects sparked the creation of makeshift towns across the Rocky Mountains. But transportation to these sites was both hard and costly. So much so that in 1874, a federally funded geological survey deemed the Glenwood Canyon impossible to travel.
When automobiles were first developed, the road system was pretty simple back then. There weren't good transportation corridors so people could move back and forth.
At the turn of the 20th.
It's so eye-opening that people, we just don't realize that. A lot of the work was already done by the native people with their horses coming through the land over and over and over. It's pretty eye-opening if we think about, as they just described, you can't necessarily move these mountains as easily, but we will learn about how the canyons made efficiently by technology and the need with transportation.
Century, less than 1,000 automobiles have been produced, less than 200 miles of paved road within the entire United States. But this paradox was created. We don't have a lot of roads because we don't have a lot of automobiles, but people aren't interested in automobiles because we don't have a lot of roads. So something had to give. Edward Taylor was a Colorado state senator known as the father of the Good Roads movement. And he had this idea of having Glenwood Canyon be part of a national boulevard connecting Denver all the way to the Utah state line. The Good Roads movement established federal funds, private funds, even sometimes state funds to establish road systems. And then once the car became popular, there was a place to put the car on. By 1899, they started construction of the Taylor State Road. And the idea was to connect the western slope to the eastern slope. And the road went right through Glenwood Canyon.
So when we were talking about all of the interesting things that were happening in the 1800s and late 1800s, mid to late, don't you think it's important, people, to understand the history of our actual land? Take a good look. I keep the closed captions on for all the listeners who possibly would like to read the screen too. So if you guys are wondering why that's on, it's intentional here for all you listeners and viewers.
It was an extremely primitive road. It was one lane. It was extremely harsh to ride on, but it was a connection.
Completed in 1902, the Taylor State Road was the first route for automobiles through the Colorado Rockies. Floods, rock slides, and snow constantly threatened the road and its travelers, giving it a dangerous reputation. Later named Highway 6, this road would soon become a major transportation corridor.
In 1903, it would take just under 5 days to travel from New York to San Francisco. By train, the railroad was king. That same year, in 1903, a
5
group
days.
went out by automobile to do the same
So
trip.
interesting.
It ended up taking them about 65 days to travel across the country. In 1919, a similar expedition was taken. It still took over 55 days to travel across the country. Clearly, the United States was falling behind on developing a strategic, a unified road system across the country. One of the people to help with that system was a colonel named Dwight Eisenhower.
Eisenhower was really impressed with the Autobahn and thought this is something that we should have in the United States. It was really considered to be a defense system that would connect the states in the event that there was some sort of attack on our country.
And of course, Eisenhower is later elected president, and the federal interstate system is one of his crowning achievements.
So in regards to our area, this has been known, as we have seen now in the 3rd episode we are on, as I would say in my personal experience, as crowning achievements for our area, massive misrepresentation of our area, big dreams accomplished in our area, as we already know, brothels and business, making something out of nothing, moving mountains and making incredible achievements in our area. I feel like this is completely well put together, and I am encouraging you guys to check out the link. Do subscribe to Rocky Mountain PBS. Give them a thumbs up. Here we go.
In the 1940s, states began evaluating where interstate highways would be built. Colorado settled on a north-south highway, which became the I-25 corridor, and an east-west corridor starting in Kansas and ending in Denver, which would become Interstate 70.
Terminating I-70 in Denver was the logical choice because then you don't have to try to traverse over the mountains. The logistics, the cost, the engineering skills that would have been involved and needed to undertake such a project, it was much simpler just to go around the mountains than through them. However, this just wouldn't do for Colorado. Our industries really needed that connection. Eventually, it was decided that Colorado should have I-70 run all the way through it. Highway 6 was decided, the route through Glenwood Springs. This was
That's very interesting. Highway 6 is near me. Oh, this is going to be fun. We're going to do a nice little drive. I'll try to encourage you guys to watch the next version of this podcast. I will put a 2022 version into the episode related to this episode. So stay tuned and watch for that.
around 1958. However, what's incredible is it would be almost another quarter century before construction of that road would actually happen.
In 1963, the idea that we were really going to do some big things in the canyon came up. And that's when I got involved. I wrote a letter to the editor saying Glenwood had better be concerned about this highway coming through in both directions. The concern was the highway's going to take all the space for people and animals.
The opposition to the Glenwood project was well-founded. I mean, there was a reason to be worried about the way that the highway department was going to protect Glenwood Canyon. You can see.
If you guys know anything about Glenwood, we actually have lots and lots and lots of issues constantly, particularly in Glenwood. And what we're going to review tonight is the waterways that also have the same issues, continually breaking down. The technology that we put all this together, as we know, the waterways, the roadways, they're old technology, which is the reality we're going to learn tonight.
See what the highway department did back in the 50s when they widened just west of No Name. For its time, it was very state-of-the-art, but it really didn't tread lightly on the canyon, which is what people wanted.
By the late 1960s, the environmental movement really took hold. In 1969, NEPA was passed, the National Environmental Protection Act. And what this did is it required that alternatives be examined before a project is undertaken. It required review, and it really put some of these decisions into the hands of local residents and concerned groups.
The terms that were used for setting up a new commission was that they wanted to have the highway design that would meld with the wonders of nature. That really defined where we were to go.
Dick Prosence was what we called back then the district engineer. Dick was especially interesting because he felt, even way back then in the 70s, that the citizens needed to be talked to and that we needed to build consensus around these projects, which is highly unusual for that period of time because back then highway engineers were just get out of our way. We're going to do what we need to do and build a safe road. And if it ruins the environment or if it screws up your town, well, that's just part of the game.
In collaboration with a Citizens Advisory Council, a new philosophy was adopted that would guide the Glenwood project throughout its construction.
Wow, wow, wow. So that actually still is a regular thing, I would say, for nature conservation and the oil industry fighting and even people being angry about certain industries moving in. This is interesting. I see a pattern here in our area. We will discuss it at the end of this episode. I want your guys' opinions. You know, chirp in if you're listening on Twitter. Thank you guys all for being here tonight.
Known as context-sensitive design.
Once it was determined that the canyon was going to be the most economic and environmentally friendly route, then the question becomes, well, how are we going to incorporate 4 lanes of traffic into Glenwood Canyon? And how are we going to do that by blending both the pristine wilderness and also this master of engineering? And so citizen advisory committees really helped with those designs. The engineering behind it is just absolutely spectacular.
I was the project manager on the I-70 project through Glenwood Canyon. When I came on in 1980, the project was in a very kind of interesting point. There was what I'd call a conceptual or preliminary layout of the project. What I did was took our conceptual preliminary design and fine-tuned it. And we moved it literally foot by foot to try to prevent a rock cut, to try to prevent river fill, save trees, things like that.
Devising.
Well, I'm really grateful for that. It is a very amazing construction. If you just analyze this, it looks similar to, I think, some of the roadways we see in Southern California. And from what I understand, in Glenwood, they do not have earthquakes, but in Grand Junction, they have minor earthquakes, I believe. Very minor tremors. So I hope they touch on that.
The highway through the Glenwood corridor was so complex, 2 experts were brought onto the project. Edgardo Contini and Joe Passano would each design half of the highway, merging their designs in the middle.
Contini and Passano, we called them inspired designers, but they were really Renaissance people. They were engineers, they were architects, they were visual experts. They could look at things and very quickly visualize a solution. Those men were very passionate about what they're doing. Contini came up with the idea of the European-style Highline Viaduct at Hanging Lake, which is just a gem. Contini could just visualize all that stuff. And then Joe Passano handled the west end of the canyon and developed the terraced alignment that we see around the Shoshone Power Plant, east and west. And that's really one of the keys to allow us to build through the canyon, yet stay within the area disturbed by Old Highway 6. And that was a fundamental of our conceptual design.
Well, we were meeting monthly in the intensive times, and the meetings were just super good. We got along just very, very well. We were a part of viewing the designs that were coming up, so it worked out so well for all of us. Joe Passano and Eduardo Contini, they did such a wonderful job in the design. They were doing it in such a heartfelt way, and that's not easy for an engineer that has to produce various products. but you could just tell it was so special for them that they almost looked at it as beyond building a road.
With Glenwood Canyon, there was vision about how that highway should fit into the landscape. And very unique techniques were put into play to ensure the preservation of those natural features. If the contractor were to hit certain plant types or knock out a tree, they could be fined or fired for doing that.
The more time everybody spent in the canyon, the more passionate they got. I'd have bulldozer operators come up to me and say, I've been working this. I think there's a way we can save a few more trees. And I'd be, wow. He got out in the canyon for a month and worked. He's like, I've got to do better. I've got to protect this canyon. I remember spending hours out there putting signs on trees, save this tree. It's context-sensitive design.
The design for Glenwood Canyon would require over 6 miles of bridges and viaducts, making up roughly half of the highway. But building these structures within the sensitive terrain required special equipment to be imported from Europe.
Erection gantry, and that's really nothing more than a crane turned like this, and you put a segment on one end, trolley it out, and glue it up and put the steel rods through and just keep on going like that. So you're not on the ground at all. You're building completely from above. We spent a lot of time trying to manage the rock mechanics of the formations and things we were in, but we ended up with a couple of very, very difficult and challenging issues. Once we started doing the subsurface drilling and started seeing what was really under the ground, it wasn't rock. At the east end of the canyon, we discovered a layer of compressible gray clay that you would never expect to find in the mountains. It created a lot of technical challenges. We invented a new type of retaining wall to respond to that. Same thing happened at the west end of the canyon. One of the things that was the most fun for me in Glenwood Canyon was managing the multidisciplinary design team. We, of course, had the old line highway engineers, the rock cut.
What we're going to touch on in a moment, I want you guys to remember this. Where is it at real quick? Is this the one? Here it is. Okay, so we're going to pop over here real quick. Don't stop listening. Let's get this excitement going, because what we were talking about just now is reflected in the next video we have not finished. So I can't wait to share it with you guys. Here we go.
For many years.
One commentator noted that we spent thousands of dollars just to drill a very small hole, and now we have well-weathered equipment to show for it.
That was kind of a pipe dream. Nobody had enough money to do that.
Except in John Wesley Powell's model of hydrological engineering that would make the capital-poor American West rich in water projects through the newly passed Reclamation Act of 1902.
John Wesley Powell's view was that the federal government was the best friend that the West could ever have, because only it had enough money to build gigantic irrigation projects and or dams to help people out in the West.
It's the power of the federal government, the capital that the federal government can provide, the expertise so that we're not having canals and ditches run uphill.
So I bring that back up because I really want you guys to understand what we're about to blow some molds in your minds about. Here we go. I'm going to stop sharing that for a second. And I want to go back to this because it makes a point. Now, that's the waterways that go all the way to Grand Junction. Here we go.
Guys, then we had the bridge designers, then we had the tunnel designers, then we had the geotechnical engineers, the rock slope engineers, the geologists, then we had the landscape architects. We had to blend a group of visual experts with a bunch of hardcore construction experts too. And I really enjoy that. These were all smart, type A, best of the best. You had to build consensus, and sometimes it took a while. I'm very proud of those guys and gals. The first tunnel we built in the early 80s, it was a very difficult formation to build. The reverse curve tunnel is not a tunnel type. The name of the curve where we built the tunnel was called reverse curve because when you were driving down, you had to do this and then you had to do this to get around the corner. We looked at several different options there. So we started doing some surface geology studies at reverse curve, and we actually saw that a tunnel option might be a good one. As always, we got overexcited and decided, let's build a double-decker tunnel. We finally decided we could squeeze the eastbound lane around on the outside, but we would just put up one westbound tunnel up high. That all worked out very well at reverse curve.
Which, if you've ever driven through these canyons, it's like intense if you are easily distracted. It's intense if you can't handle night driving. I think they did very well in the railing. If you see on the upper portion of this bridge, if you've ever driven, like I said earlier in this podcast, like a good hour and a half into finding yourself in the Garfield County area, it is a massive elevation drop. So like when you're coming along this bend, you could be having your car break down from just coming through the canyon. So it's an intense, beautiful sight when you come around the side, and it's very well constructed. I feel like the lanes could be extended if it was, technology double deck it itself. I don't know, but the construction in its own, like put a double. I think that's what they could do, the upper deck. But it's very interesting.
Tunnels were an essential design element for the Glenwood Canyon Highway. The two hanging lake tunnels, each 4,000 feet long and lined with over 2 million tiles, were not only an engineering feat, but also achieved the goal of having Hanging Lake be an entirely auto-free zone.
People didn't want the canyon to be affected by a traditional road building technique, such as just blasting through. There was an interest in conforming the interstate to the canyon and allowing the canyon's natural features to remain versus the other way around.
Let's say that there was a cliff you had to bring down. They'd go to the top of the cliff and drill it and blow it away. And as you looked at it, wow, here's this beautiful rock wall with all these vertical lines in it of half of a drilling hole.
Citizens Committee did not want to see those holes. Those holes are actually safety features because you blow back to that hole and you end up with a nice, safe, sturdy face. So we had to develop other techniques where we'd blast back to a joint, which would break out, and that would leave that face. It was very hard to do. It's actually easier to do what I call a butter knife cut. That's just a nice slope and it's all even. It's really hard to do some of the things we did in Glenwood Canyon, but now that it's been done, those techniques, they're used all over the world now.
Blasting, even to a natural fault, left a new rock face that didn't match the weathered aesthetic of the canyon. To solve this, the landscape architects and geologists turned to a unique solution that had only been used once before.
You'd have rocks that would be cut and they looked fresh. They didn't have the aging look of those that were next to them that were natural. And so they stained it. After that, you just couldn't even tell that there had been a part of the canyon cut down.
That's context-sensitive design. If you've got a beautiful canyon, you want to put a beautiful highway through it. You want to make sure that your design honors the natural context of the environment you're going through. And that's what drove Glenwood Canyon.
With over.
And I feel like that's what also brought people to the area that we're going to discuss further tonight, all the way to Grand Junction. It's really interesting when we're going to touch on next is the rail history of Glenwood Springs, not just our lovely Western Colorado water and power, but it's all part of the story. So I do encourage you guys to sit back, relax, get some coffee and some Mary if you're part of the crew, or get some popcorn and some whatever refreshments. Come and join us. Chat below if you're watching the replay. Let me know if you're local, if you visited this area. Please let me know as well. And let me know where you're listening from on the podcast tonight.
40 bridges, 15 miles of retaining walls, 300,000 tons of structural and reinforcing steel, and 810,000 pounds of concrete. The Glenwood Canyon Highway is an engineering marvel. With as many as 500 highway workers employed in the canyon each day, and a final cost of over $490 million, construction of this magnificent highway was complete. But there was still one more commitment to fulfill.
Revegetation of Glenwood Canyon, like many other things, was very unique. We actually collected native seeds in Glenwood Canyon and stored them, and then used those to do the revegetation. Those were state-of-the-art techniques. The ability to have your own nursery stock was important because we were afraid of actually not being able to get enough planting materials to be able to revegetate, because it was a commitment to revegetate each project. There was a complete revegetation system that was very successful. It's just an inspirational place. After 12 years of construction in Glenwood Canyon, we cut the ribbon in October of 1992. The project was substantially finished. In rough numbers, I would always say it was about 40 million a mile.
Interstate 70 through Glenwood Canyon is probably one of the most spectacular stretches of interstate in the country. And interestingly, it's one of the final stretches of interstate to be built. They call it the final link. It's almost like they saved the best for last. It could be a postcard. You don't even notice that the highway is there, and that's how well built it was.
You know, I think we got an award for having the most orange barrels on any highway in America for a period of time. I've received many personal awards. The award that was most compelling for me was the Outstanding Civil Engineering Achievement from the American Society of Civil Engineers. That's a tough place to put a highway.
I-70 through the canyon is the lifeblood of this area for transportation. We are able to modify nature. We are able to adapt to nature. We're able to put a 4-lane highway in this extremely narrow canyon. But
And let me just say, in very snowy climate, it's incredible to drive if you are not familiar with incline and the beauty takes your eyes. Let's put it like that. Be a good driver if you try to drive Glenwood Canyon in the winter. I have driven it with literal brakes that have been out, and it's a very interesting experience. I'll say that if you guys have ever driven I-70.
at the end of the day, nature still wins. We still have rock slides that'll close down I-70 for long stretches. Fires have gone through and closed down the canyon for weeks at a time.
If you guys have been following me for the last 6 years, the air quality has been really, 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 really hard for me as a Colorado resident. I have had to turn off my swamp cooler for like hours at a time when we've had fires in Glenwood, which have actually, I think this is like the first time we haven't had a massive fire that really, in how many years now, that hasn't lasted for months and months. I think we had one that lasted 2.5 months. It's an incredible thing when your beautiful mountains are lit up in smoke. I'll just say that.
When Glenwood Canyon is closed due to rockfall or fire, it affects the detour routes, it affects commerce. It's a big deal. In the summer of 2020, Grizzly Creek Fire shut down the interstate and damaged some of the feature of the interstate. Obviously, there were effects to the natural environment as well.
The Grizzly Creek Fire started in August of 2020 and was not 100% contained until 4 months later in December. The highway was closed for 14 days as the fire burned over 30,000 acres. The fire cleared the way for substantial mud and rock slides. The most consequential one, not only...
Yeah, this is the one I'm referring to. I can remember it very, very, very much. I literally couldn't breathe. The worst asthma I've ever had. It's something that you trade for the wilderness and fires that we have quite frequently. I mean, really, is there any state that you can get away from in the western part of America that doesn't have fires? I mean, fires are happening everywhere, it seems, for different reasons. But this is a really good, I'm glad they're touching on this because it's extremely sincerely something I have a hard time with understanding how the pioneers made it because it's so intense.
damaged the highway. It even altered the flow of the Colorado River.
In 2019, CDOT completed a historic context study of I-70 through Glenwood Canyon. And as part of that, we identified the stretch of highway through the canyon from like milepost 116 to 133 as a historic district. And it's significant because of its association with the development of transportation in Colorado, but also it's significant for its design and as a really good example of context-sensitive design of an interstate through a really important natural feature. But what's interesting about it is it's also a functional transportation facility that is supposed to be dynamic. It's going to have to be improved and maintained over time. So it's an interesting balance between wanting to preserve it as a historic district, but knowing that it's also a functional transportation feature.
Well, they literally touched on what I am saying tonight. You guys, it's so real if we really do look at it. Yes, I can't imagine from the eyes of 1890, let's say 1899, I think it was, they said. And we're going to touch on the train systems as well in a moment. I think in the eyes of the original pioneers who came and the people that knew what was coming to their area, how bright and shiny all the new businesses were all the way through the canyon. I mean, the brothels, if it was something that was, it is a reality history. If it was something that was so alive in people's backyards, I mean, second nature society, as they even described, that there were some hotels, as we've learned so far tonight. Glenwood Springs in general was the first open city next to Aspen. And we're not touching on Aspen probably until the end of all of these series. And then I'll do a whole nother version of old historic Colorado. But as we do know, the mining cities in general of what brought money and people and all of what we know. So I find it's extremely important for people to keep in mind that the road system, can you imagine the eyes of the original people who had just started getting cars, people bringing money to these areas, people moving their businesses and talents and even running away from the law, coming through this beautiful canyon. I always think about it. I've always thought about it since a child, that coming to at least Parachute or Battlement, how much did it look from the roadway of what it looks today? And this particular episode tonight definitely confirms that it is just magnificent from the whole way here, the whole way leaving, and every time I come. It is a trade-off to live in an area that you're going to have to do a lot more maintenance to your car or have a car with four-wheel drive. People do make it around with two-wheel. I've made it around with a Corolla for years in big snowstorms, but I've also had to experience being in a dangerous spin-out situation in Glenwood Canyon myself. Hopefully when my co-hosts come back on the next episode and can join me in one of these lovely podcast episodes for Western Colorado, I think we all can understand it's about understanding even when you were in Louisiana's old world streets and things break down. It's time and engineering and how much money is able to come. So obviously we're going to touch in a moment here on how important these roads are because, of course, transportation is what it's about. Semis, I-70 runs through most of the country, the inner central part of the country. I hope you guys are enjoying tonight. Let me know in the comments below.
Beyond its contribution to Western development and commerce, Glenwood Canyon remains a significant cultural landscape to the Ute people.
The Glenwood Springs area is a very important component of the Ute ancestral lands. There are still many things that have happened with tribes being placed on the reservation that has significantly affected how we live. Some tribes have lost their language. Why? Because we're out of that environment that language was born within. We're out of those elements. And so the loss was huge. It's still being felt today. But despite all of that loss, all of that trauma, we are thriving today. We are adapting and thriving so that future generations will be able to live within our culture and our traditional values. Sense of place is important. It has an important place in the culture and the lifestyles of Indian people. And to be removed from the places that you knew, the places that you sustained yourself, the places that your kids may have been born in, the places that maybe your grandparents or your mother or your father may have been buried in that area, that is a very huge sense of loss. And I do believe that all tribes have felt that loss and have felt it tremendously. The Forest Service has set up kiosks to tell the history of the Ute people. And that is done through the National Historic Preservation Act as a part of their management plan for the Forest Service. So they do work with the tribes closely to ensure that accurate information is put on those kiosks. Those stories are important so that we have a full and robust knowledge of the land base that we're utilizing and being respectful to that.
What I love about Glenwood Canyon is, one, it's masterful blending of pristine environment and engineering. It's the best of nature and it's the best of human technology and innovation coming together. What I also love about Glenwood Canyon is it really sets this precedence of we can have citizens help us determine this. Yes, you're going to impact nature when you put in a 4-lane highway. There's no denying that the canyon underwent massive changes, but we can do it in a way that is well thought out. But it also shows a beauty of this process that we're going to have to rely on more and more.
It's a great example of context-sensitive design. It's how highways should be built through sensitive areas. Glenwood Canyon is the crown jewel of the interstate system nationally. We should be proud that we can build things like that, and we should apply that sort of thinking to other projects and other transportation corridors in the state.
Glenwood Canyon brought a lot of innovation into the highway industry from the perspective of environmental protection, tunnel engineering, rock slope engineering, foundation engineering.
The Highway Commission said we were going to blend the wonders of nature with the wonders of human engineering, and they've done that.
There's a story that during the opening of the canyon that one highway official said it would have been cheaper just to pave this with silver dollars. Yes, the highway was expensive. Yes, it took 12 years to build 12 miles. The fact that we can merge nature and engineering together, the fact that we can support our industries and our economies through transportation, but at the same time, listen to the voice of the communities nearby and to stakeholders, makes it worth that expense. And it makes it worth every silver dollar that it took to create that highway.
Thank you guys for listening tonight. So I'm going to pull up next, dropping this in the comments as well for all you listeners. I hope you guys are enjoying what we were just listening to. I believe that's the one. Yes. Let me stop sharing this and bring this over to you guys who are listening. If you're on Facebook, you should be able to click that link. If you are on Twitch, take a look at it as well. We are going to pop on over here because I really want to talk about, oh, I already have it up. Great. Give me one moment. So should we hit Hotel Colorado? Let's go with that one real quick. Let's see if this is the video I wanted to queue up. I believe it is. Or are we going to go with the rail? Where's my rail? Doc Holiday. All right, I think it's over here. Let me drop this one out of here. The rail. Here we go. Here we go. Okay. I've already thought quite literally it's exciting to share this with you guys. All right, here we go.
Well, the name is Pat Thrasher. I am the president of the Western Colorado chapter of the National Railway Historical Society and manager of the Glenwood Railroad Museum. Railroads historically facilitated a westward migration. They had their environmental impacts, they had their cultural impacts. They also became a very colorful part of the history of the West, especially. Prior to 1887, if you wanted to come to Glenwood Springs, it was a challenge. Conventional wisdom was Glenwood Canyon was impassable. Even the Native American tribes went around the canyon rather than through it. That all changed in October of 1887 when the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad finally arrived here. They were in a bit of a race with another railroad, the Colorado Midland, and won that race by about 4 months. 1887, railroad construction is still largely done by hand, and much of it by immigrant labor. A whole host of people and a whole host of cultures were involved in construction of the Denver and Rio Grande, as was the case with many of the Western railroads at that same time period. Coming down through the canyon, they had to carve out a bench on which to put the railroad. There were a number of tunnels that had to be hand cut, essentially. A lot of folks think Glenwood was the destination, and it was not.
This is the point. I love that they're touching on this. Oh, this is great. Great, great, great. Hope you guys are enjoying. Comment below if you're enjoying. Let me know if those links work too. That also helps me, lets me know. I am pretty sure I set it up to click back for chat replay. So if you guys are able to see that, let me know in the comments.
Destination was Aspen because of the mining activity. Glenwood Springs just happened to be along the way. At the same time, there were some things here in Glenwood that attracted people, the hot springs, the scenery. Several presidents would come here, most notably Teddy Roosevelt, who used the Hotel Colorado as his Western White House during one of his hunting trips. The first station here in Glenwood Springs, in fact, was typical wood frame railroad architecture. It was located about 4 blocks west of where we are today. You know, the first road into Glenwood really didn't occur until after 1900. And so if you really were coming to Glenwood Springs, you came by train. The depot was the front door to the community. It was the front door to the Roaring Fork Valley. In the early 1900s, folks started putting some pressure on the Denver and Rio Grande to build a new depot, one that was a little bit more representative of the images that people had of their community. They hired an architect who already had some local experience. His name's Theodore von Rosenberg. He had previously done the design work for the bathhouse and hot springs pool for the Devereaux family.
I will look into finding out where his grave's at, if it is local, and we will try to do a little hello to the history, as in regards to what is referenced on my podcast. If you guys are interested in that, let me know in the comments if you're enjoying this kind of content. This is a reaction mix-up mashup history lesson. Check out the description below. You can learn more. The links are always described after the live, so thank you guys for listening tonight.
This building is completed in the late spring of 1904. It was designed to the social standards of the day, and that included 2 waiting rooms. The railroad practiced gender segregation, as did most railroads of the day. So they had a men's waiting room and a ladies' waiting room. Train travel has been evolutionary. It was, in the beginning, utilitarian. I mean, it was essential, particularly if you were going to travel any great distance. And a lot of those early passenger cars
Cheers,
were
UFO. Welcome.
not all that comfortable. The suspension's a little rough. The benches are a little rough. They're heated with coal stoves in the corner. Rail passenger travel sort of evolved from an absolute essential to something that became a little bit more sophisticated. And we start to see into late 1930s introduction of the streamliners. Stainless steel, streamlined, shiny, diesel electric, none of this coal smoke. That sparks a whole revolution in rail travel. Finally, then, the original California Zephyr. in 1949. The Cal Zephyr was one of the first trains to employ Vistadome cars. And tradition has it that Glenwood Canyon, in fact, is responsible for the inspiration of the Vistadome cars, for which the Cal Zephyr and other trains became so well known. When air travel becomes a lot more reliable and we're building interstate highways, there's a movement afoot by most of the railroads to get out of the passenger business, and yet there are a lot of people who want to continue riding trains, and that's.
If you ever get a chance to ride a train in your life, I do highly suggest it. That's one of the things I'm really grateful for my parent for. My mother took me on a train ride through most of America, actually, all around to New York, up and down, north and south from Louisiana, all around. I've been on a train to Colorado from Louisiana back in the early 90s. I really encourage it. Now, it's super expensive experience these days. I'll say that one. Um, if you can ever get an experience to do it through the Glenwood Canyon, it's a real treat because, again, what they're going to describe is the innovation that's just incredible, and how close it literally gets to the mountainside.
When we see the birth of the Amtrak. One of the trains that survives is the California Zephyr. It looks a little different than the original Zephyr, but it's still here. You can get on the train, you can kick back. I like to encourage folks to put the books away, put the devices away. It's a way to see some parts of Colorado, some parts of the country in general that you don't easily see from an airplane or from a car. I would like to think that more and more people will embrace rail travel as an alternative. For folks who are considering coming to Glenwood Springs, whether it's for a weekend or a week or whatever, if they want to get connected with the history of this area, and particularly with the rail history, they need to include a stop at the Glenwood Railroad Museum. We're here and ready to help introduce folks to what this community and what this area is all about.
Well, this is exciting, and I just made a little note. If you guys are listening, I will actually be following up on this understanding of Glenwood Springs, the history of the canyon, Garfield County in general, and Battlement Mesa. We're going to go all the way up the canyon this evening. We've been recording tonight and broadcasting for an hour and a half. I am going to keep going. I hope you guys are having a great night. Thank you so much, UFO Factor Fiction, for joining us tonight on the podcast. We are going into the West, the Wild West, Western Colorado's history. We have discussed so far the waterway just a little bit, as we did in the first and second episode. Now we're in the third episode, and we're talking about the awesome interstate system. And thanks for joining me. And we're talking about the rail system because, as we're going to read our PDF this evening of the local area that I live in, its history, what we have learned so far tonight, I feel, is from 1870s, roughly mid 1870s, to estimated 1890s late, is when all the hustle and bustle through these canyons came through. And it mostly has to do with the Ute Indian being becoming their native reservation tribes. It's really it's an amazing situation to see what happened, like almost 40 years total, how much building really happened. And then if we see the massive boom after the 1970s, well, let's say more so 1930s is what they said Glenwood tonight, if we review a little bit here, if you're just joining tonight. 1930s is when things really started booming. Brothels were very big out here. I knew it was. The bars, the saloons, and then they turned into candy shops and other fun little odds and ends. So even soda pop shops were initially brothels. So that makes sense. The countertop, where initially they used to hand you a little card and say, go up to room such and such. Now I guess that was a large distribution candy center now. So funny. I thought initially tonight when we were listening to the podcast that all these lovely brothel girls, what if they continue to work at the brothel, right? But it became a candy shop, soda shop, and they are either serving you or they were saying, well, we have some chocolate you can try this. This is newly imported to the area. It's just fresh, it's so silly. The whole thing is so silly. And then when we hear about our local area and all of the agriculture that happened due to the access to the waterway, due to the encouragement of homesteading, due to the relationships with government and newly landowners, I find it interesting. I want to look into the stories of the locals here in Parachute Battlement and the surrounding areas. If you guys are listening and you have any relatives of this area, if there's some kind of connection to this area, you think you have some information to share, please send me an email down below on the screen. If you see it scrolling, it's Rachel Raw Truth. My email address is there at gmail.com. I really encourage you guys to get a hold of me. I think it's exciting to share. We're going to get more into this, and then we're going to dive into more of the PDF tonight. So stay tuned for that if you're listening.
From the perspective of that really colorful railroad history.
Okay, now let's dive more, I think, into the best part tonight. I hope I didn't get rid of it. Let's see what we got here, sirs and madams. I've got it. Let's bring it up. So we're going to dive into a nice little character named Doc Holliday. And not everybody knows about this interesting person. Where are we at here? Are you here? Or are we going to go to hotel? Oop. Where's it at? There you go. Dun, 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 dun. Okay. Buckle up. Get ready. Here's some more spice to the mix to our podcast tonight, because we must know about the history of all the people that stomp the grounds we're talking about.
The nomadic Ute Indians tell us they've lived in the Rocky Mountains for thousands of years. Imagine Utes camped in their teepees along the Colorado River near the Yampa Hot Springs. They considered the natural hot springs sacred, performing ceremonies and soaking in them for rejuvenation and healing. Hi, I'm Bill Kite, Executive Director of the Glenwood Springs Historical Society and Frontier Museum. It only seems natural then that in the 1800s, Glenwood Springs would become a center for tourists to visit and to experience the therapeutic effects of the hot springs. It welcomed visitors first on foot, then by carriage, train, and eventually by automobile. But it was the train that put Glenwood Springs on the map, creating access for everyone. Tom Mix came by train, making the first full-length silent movie using the railroad. Teddy Roosevelt came by rail many times, making the Hotel Colorado his Western White House. And the train not only brought more and more visitors to Glenwood Springs, it also brought all the goods and materials to build the infrastructure that created a destination resort. One of the founders of Glenwood Springs was Isaac Cooper. His wife named our town Glenwood after their hometown, Glenwood, Iowa. Isaac later added the word springs to promote his vision of what we today call a resort. His idea was one of, and I quote, sharing their miracle healing with the ill of the entire world. Not only did the ill be drawn to this beautiful mountain town, so were the wealthy who wanted a place to get away from the cares of the world and relax.
I will be taking you guys on a walking tour through some of these old locations. If you guys have ever been here, definitely type in the comments below. Let me know. If you're on the replay, let me know too, because I can always add it to the list of future episodes to feature for you listeners. I'm so excited to share this with you guys.
The term spa in the mountains came from one of the early developers of Glenwood Springs, Walter Devereaux. In February 1888, Walter started the construction of what is now the Hot Springs Pool, finishing in time for the July 4th, 1888 dedication. The stone bathhouse wasn't completed until December 1888. Wanting to attract people for the healing waters of the hot springs, Walter Devereaux constructed the Hotel Colorado and the Vapor Caves in 1895. So from its beginning, Glenwood Springs has benefited from what it means to be a resort town. It has invited people from all over the world to come here and, as a resort does, relax and recreate. Today, Glenwood Springs has 3 hot springs destinations: the Yampa Spa Hot Springs Vapor Caves, Glenwood Hot Springs, and the Iron Mountain Hot Springs. Natural and man-made attractions make this town compelling to visitors, such as the Glenwood Caverns Adventure Park, the Frontier Historical Museum, historic lodging, and our historic downtown. Tourism continues to contribute to the economic driver of Glenwood Springs. History continues to.
Let me check the date on this. This is February 5th, 2019. I feel like some of these clips are older. But if you guys have ever been here, it is also a major contributor to the cannabis industry, which I sincerely appreciate. They have believed in safe access from the early days. They're actually a big portion of stories I will tell in the future with my co-host on in the future that we will discuss Glenwood further. My mom had a lot of open-minded doctors back in the day in the early 90s when she was suffering with cancer, which I feel like Glenwood was just one of those places that is very open-minded, and have always been into new age thinking. Even my doctors, when I was dealing with my health problems and becoming a mother, I'm glad I had my son in that hospital. Absolutely. February 5th is a great day. So yeah, it's a really unique place. If you've never been there, it feels so unique. If you've ever been to Switzerland, I actually saw the other day. I think I took a screenshot. I will show you guys on the next episode. But Colorado is the Switzerland of America. It really, really is. When I went to Switzerland, I was kind of feeling jaded. I actually said that to a good friend of mine. Like, okay, it's just too weird because I feel like I've been here. Actually, I feel like I live here. And I can't see the beauty the way I should see it. Switzerland was a little higher, but mountains get that high in Colorado, especially where I live. They're pretty captivating, I will say that.
Remain important to our visitors. So next time you come to Glenwood Springs, drop by the historic Frontier Museum and you'll find displays and walking tours of downtown and such places as the Pioneer Cemetery where Doc Holliday is buried. Glenwood Springs continues to remain an important historic destination and will do so well into the future.
By the way, our cannabis sales tax is 17% compared to other parts in the state. So that says a lot to the area. Let me give you guys a new taste, a new little refresher here. I was going to bring this up. I'm going to put that to the side real quick. How's everybody doing tonight? I hope you're having a great night out there. Let's see here. Let me share this. And let's go right here. I think this is the one. This is the one. Okay, strap in, guys. It's going to be fun.
Probably familiar with the pistol neon sign located above me. Doc Holliday's Saloon is a local's favorite bar and grill located right here in the heart of downtown Glenwood Springs. So join me as we get a first-hand look at the Old West.
One of our historical pieces here is our real working fireplace, where they do the rotisserie chicken right here on a spit, living room area. They'd all enjoy the nice hot fire. I love Doc's because my husband and I used to come here before we ever moved here, and we'd come over the bridge and we'd see the Pistol Neon, and we'd stop here for our annual beer every single year, and we'd have lunch and always say to each other, I was in college and he was working for Hughes Aircraft, and I was a student, and saying, oh, if we ever moved to Glenwood Springs, that would be the bar we'd want to own. And so the fact that we now get to own it is very cool. Really, a lot of people know us because of our neon sign out front. It's our Pistol Neon.
This is definitely a unique experience walking into this bar. Tell me a little bit more about what's behind you.
Our antique back bar is probably what Doc Holliday's is most famous for, besides the Pistol Neon sign out front. It is a late 1800s back bar built by the Amalgamated Woodworkers Union. So it actually has the Amalgamated Woodworkers Union stamps on it. So we think it's pretty cool and it's beautiful. It was brought in the 80s from Leadville, Colorado. The Three Arches back bar actually has a
This is not the video I wanted, but you guys are welcome to check it out. It's not the one that I wanted. I'm sorry. Let's fix this right here. I'm going to throw that in there because you guys can check it out, but it's not the one I wanted to showcase. So let's go back over to the Historic Hotel, Colorado, because if you have learned anything tonight, you have learned that it's not just Parachute, Colorado, it's the roads. It's all the things. Let's watch this.
In 1893, silver and coal tycoon Walter Devereaux built the magnificent Hotel Colorado for $850,000. The Grand Dame of the Rockies was modeled after the Villa de Medici, a 16th century Italian mansion.
Devereaux wanted to magnify the beauty of the West. He didn't want to build a New York City hotel. He wanted to take as many of the natural materials in the area and utilize them. The setting, having the hotel raised with the mountains behind it, I believe that they were all strategic decisions in building something that was uniquely Western.
Hotel Colorado was constructed from 10,000 tons of red peach blow sandstone and cream-colored Roman brick. It was a state-of-the-art retreat with electricity, marble fireplaces, and private baths.
Sorry about that, everybody. Let me know if you can hear me. Hello, hello. Hold on a second, everybody. think you can hear me. We had a little technical issue with my internet. It's okay. Everything's good. Let's go back to the great video we were watching. It's terrible when it does that, isn't it? All right. I think it's because I put it on too big a screen. And I don't think it really matters right this second. Oh, we got it. We got it. We're good. We're good. We got this. We got this. Dun, 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 dun. Because we're learning. You can hear? Good. Good to know. I appreciate it. So let me fix this. Let me fix this. I got to make sure where I'm at here. Okay. So we go here, and then we go here. And then, like Grandma would explain, let's go over here. I think we missed a few minutes of it, but that's okay.
The Devereaux Suite, it's the largest, all the Devereaux Suite, the Molly Brown Suite today, 70 feet in the air.
All right, I'm going to fix this because actually my friend just stayed in one of the suites that they're about to describe. Oh, and I remember her showing me the columns. Hold on, we're about to go back. Let's just rewatch this. It's worth it. Everybody should appreciate it. I'm going to put in the comments where you can follow this. If you've noticed on all the videos I featured tonight, I think you should go follow. Hit the thumbs up. Put your little bell on because it's important to support other content creators, including Historic PBS. I appreciate you guys. So if you're listening, thank you guys. Give me a thumbs up. Share me out if you appreciate the content. And here we go.
With the mountains behind it. I believe that they were all strategic decisions and building something that was uniquely Western.
Hotel Colorado was constructed from 10,000 tons of red peach blow sandstone and cream-colored Roman brick. It was a state-of-the-art retreat with electricity, marble fireplaces, and private baths.
They flew a fountain in from Italy that was a replica of the fountain at the World's Fair. Extravagant gardens, over 2,000 rose bushes were planted at the opening of the hotel in the courtyard. It was the jewel of its day. Legend has it that
if you are listening and you've been to the Glenwood Springs Hotel Colorado, please let me know. I had a friend recently go there and have like a total experience by the fire pits that they were discussing. I think it's a magical place. I do encourage you guys. It's like a bucket list thing. You should definitely go there. It's not as spooky as you guys probably think. The ghosts that are there, we will go over them. They're not horrible. They're more so domineering. But good things, very good things. Hi there, the Jewish redneck Perper. I like your name. Great. Welcome. Thank you for being here.
that every day at 12 noon, those fountains shot 70 feet in the air. Actually, back when the hotel was first opened in 1893, the local community was not allowed into the hotel. So it was interesting because a gathering point for the local community would be what we're trying to extend today. I would say I have three premier suites at the Hotel Colorado. The Devereaux Suite, the Molly Brown Suite, and the Roosevelt Suite are all unique within their own. All three rooms have the personality of their founders. The Devereaux Suite, it's the largest square footage suite in the hotel. We wanted families to be able to go in there and feel like they were in the Devereaux home.
My friend, Mac, she will be on a future podcast, can say for herself she got to experience this wonderful room. And there was very interesting things that happened in the hotel while she visited. This is how gorgeous this room is. Take a little gander. If you got it on a big screen, let me know in the comments. If you're just listening, let me know as well. I am so excited to share this with you guys. Look at the mountainside. Look at it. It's magical.
We want in each one of the suites to educate the people that are staying in there.
The Molly Brown Suite offers panoramic views of the city from its 2 brick-lined balconies. Brown was famous for her Titanic voyage, yet she was also known as a civil rights champion for women and juveniles.
We hired Molly Brown's great-granddaughter and worked on research for the Molly Brown Suite for over a year. And so many of these photos have never been seen outside the family. There are combs and hats and gloves and shadow boxes that belong to Margaret Brown that were donated to the hotel.
Big shout out to Bradford Blair. Thank you for listening, sir. I know you've been following me on YouTube for a hot minute and on Facebook. Thank you for your support, your likes all the time. And yes, we are looking at the history of Glenwood Springs because it's a huge part of how this lovely little road to where I live and the documents we're going to read really do make more sense. I think it's interesting for us to also bring up the history in a more colorful way in a future podcast about Molly Brown. I have studied Titanic's history for many years. Who else in the chat has enjoyed the history that has come out slowly over time? I mean, I wish we knew everything, but I mean, the ship itself can't be removed from the ocean fully, so we can only really study it as it breaks down. To know that she lived after she went through the experiences and came to this miraculous place. Her home, if you've ever looked into Molly Brown, her home is pretty beautiful. So let's get back into the lovely content tonight. Thank you for joining me, Bradford.
The Roosevelt Suite is named for President Theodore Roosevelt, a frequent visitor to Colorado and an advocate for the environment. During his 1905 summer visit, the hotel's East Wing was dubbed the Western White House.
When President Roosevelt went out, hunted numerous times during a period of a week, he kept coming back empty-handed. And the chambermaids at the Hotel Colorado made him a burlap bear. He didn't think that that was very funny. And he took the teddy bear and gave it to his daughter, Alice. And Alice actually cloned what we know today as a teddy bear. She said,
So I had shared that with you guys in the first episode. People don't believe it. It's true. Actually, if you guys get a chance to come to Glenwood Springs, go to Glenwood Springs. Go to the Hotel Colorado. Get yourself a bear. Give it to your loved one. I don't know how to explain it to you. I'm sure there are manufacturers all over the world, if not just China. But it's just the representation of buying it from that one particular place. It's one of those things as a souvenir gift, absolutely for a child. I still have mine. I'll try to find it and I'll showcase it on a future. It's powerful, but it's funny, the story. He just threw it over to his daughter.
I'm going to call this bear Teddy. Thus, the legend continues that the Hotel Colorado was the birthplace of the legendary toy, the teddy bear.
During World War II, Hotel Colorado was transformed into a naval hospital.
What the Navy did when they came into the hotel was probably the biggest impact is they removed all porous materials. They closed up almost all the fireplaces because at one time when this was built, there were over 117 fireplaces, except the 2 grand fireplaces in the lobby. They removed a lot of the marble and they put in a sprinkler system, which the hotel didn't have when it was built. And it's ironic because this fire system is so overcapacitated that they used to put a little card in the room back in the 50s that said, we have a fire system installed by the US Navy and it pumps out X number of gallons a minute. So in case of a fire, you're more likely to drown than you are burned.
That's something to ponder. Oh my goodness, how funny. I actually have a plaque. I will feature it on my Instagram at the end of this episode. That is from the Hotel Colorado. It actually reads, "This room is equipped with Edison electric lights. Do not attempt to light a match. Simply turn a key on the wall by the door. Thank you." So it's one of those old historic things that like transformed the hotel over time and it became a little plaque. It's adorable. Anyway, I'll share that for some historic Glenwood Springs Hotel Colorado in the future at the end of this episode.
They pretty much stripped the hotel of any of its original antiques, etc. And our goal was to restore it to its original luster.
The wrought iron round the dome fixtures that are on the grand staircase and on the fireplaces and fixtures that are down the hallways. We went back and we tried to replicate whenever possible. You get into these rooms and you have plaster walls and you have high ceilings. You have hallways, in some instances, 2 or 3 times as wide as a standard hotel. They wouldn't build a hotel like this today. It wouldn't make financial sense. You couldn't do it. The height.
The hallway we just saw in this last little clip, I'm almost positive on the next episode, if I can get my lovely Mac on the episode, she could give her representation, because I'm pretty sure I have it on my phone, which would make it quite easy to share with you guys, at least in listening capacity, even in audio. Listening for the lovely child sounds we heard, and the sounds of men talking, and the odd steps where she wasn't stepping, and the weird grunting sounds that were like a man being irritated a woman had passed her. It was so strange. So it's all through these hallways. I hope you guys are listening. Hope you guys are enjoying the show tonight. And yes,
To
let's
the ceilings, the
keep
width of the
watching.
hallways, and all those things are from Devereaux's original vision. If you're expecting a Hilton or a Hyatt, oh gee, there's a little nick. We look at those as character marks, and there's a few character marks in that floor out there. But at the same time, you think the people that walk those halls, the conversations that must have taken place there, that's going to be.
And which is exactly what I'm saying. Like, if you see this little side over here, if you're watching my mouse, there's a column right here. We have the fireplace, we have chairs. I remember in particular, she was walking through one of these ways, and it literally sounded like someone was speaking, and then she walked away. And in the hallway, in the turn, like I said, the grunting sound, it's so crazy. I had her actually just keep her phone on a camera and let me record it, or let me review the recordings after she took them. So there were multiple sound bites that we captured just listening from simply a video. It's pretty incredible place. And I think he says it's so true. Like, when you're walking through these halls, it's not like an eerie, creepy, not a good feeling. It's so, except she did say at some points when we had heard the sounds make grunting, like irritated, we believe that was a residual energy just standing around the corner being like, why are you on this hallway, as a woman? Because it almost felt like she was being watched, but not in like a demonic way, more so in a literal ghost. It was pretty insane.
Our keystone.
I think when you're in the Hotel Colorado, a lot of people experience different things. Some people say that it was haunted. Some people say that it's a very spiritual place. When I'm walking through the Hotel Colorado, this building speaks to me. It reaches out and touches me. If you're in tune and you're listening and you're taking in the entire environment, it's going to leave a mark on you.
Oh my goodness. What a well said statement. So let's pull up one more fun little thing here. I am so excited to go off into this little fun part. Let me make sure. No, we're in the great spot. Okay. So I will be on the next episode, I believe, bringing up brothels at least a little bit more, because I have done a ton of research on that. But we're going on 2 hours, which we did about 3 on the last episode. I think we're doing pretty good. Here we go. If you guys are enjoying the history, let me know. Let me pull up my StreamYard and share this with you guys. And here we go. So I had featured this on the first and the second episode. This is the indulgence of the West. Okay, here we go.
Using cocaine. Cocaine was so much more intense, so much stronger than the cocoa leaves. And it was seen as a wonder drug. What disease could cocaine not cure? Cocaine.
And I want to bring this one particular up, because now what we know so far is from 1870s approximately to approximately the 1930s, which we're going to now talk about times in this lovely episode, especially at this point, mid to the end. I'm going to drop the link in a second into the StreamYard so you guys can see that and connect if you want to watch this on your own in full without any commentary. But it makes it really a reality that what we are known for in history, Colorado in general, is transferring things. If we're looking at it in general as a land grab, what we've learned tonight is innovation's incredible, but addiction's real. And most of my episodes, I like to touch on different kind of conversations, and some of them we have made headway discussing addiction and what really does happen in society. There's isolation too with a lot of addiction. And if you can imagine what we're about to learn about Denver coming from its place in manufacturing and access for opioids so far we've learned tonight, and other widely interesting drugs we're going to learn tonight as well. So I do encourage you guys to take this with a grain of salt. It's opinion in some of the parts we're going to watch. So no discrimination towards anyone's belief systems. But I do think it's a really good grasp. I've watched this particular episode a few times, and I think it's such a good, remarkable collection of reality of our history in Colorado.
Cocaine was used to stimulate repurchase of things. So you'd find cocaine inside cigarettes and so forth. That made the person feel good when they were smoking, and so they would go out and repurchase that particular product. There were also a lot of soft drinks on the market.
Coca-Cola is named after the coca leaf that was one of its original ingredients. Until the 1920s, there was some form of coca leaf in Coca-Cola. So
now, what do we know in history, listeners? What do we know about the the train line system? It is how, and we've learned this in this episode, how things got across the country, how the United States actually became a vast. I think we'll have to do an actual episode on just the train line across the United States, so we all really do understand how things get around. And this isn't strictly about addiction. This is just about history and the geographic changes in our land and really what happens. Coca-Cola was transferred all over the place and well documented to be used, even given on the train system to the luxury caboose, the little luxury dine cart train. So if you can take this in, then I'm sure through the areas we've learned tonight, as luxury was its resort city. So everything is about indulgence. It's about commodity. It's about access. So this is a really unique part to chat about. Here we go.
it was ubiquitous. You could find it everywhere. But like opium and like alcohol, cocaine has addictive properties. It has a debilitating side that when abused can cause a lot of health problems, cause a lot of social problems. By the early 20th century, Americans began to realize that we need to kind of step back from drugs like cocaine or opium. And we have to figure out how to regulate this better so that we're not creating overdoses, we're not creating bad domestic situations, we're not creating opportunities for abuse.
You could put anything on a bottle and claim it cures everything from cancer to baldness. Put a little oil in there, tastes like a medicine. A little alcohol gives them a buzz. If you want to...
That's what we know in history. That's what we all know in history. I bet you're all laughing. I know. I'm laughing with you. I absolutely am.
Surefire bestseller. You put a little rat poison in there, strychnine. People would drink it and start getting cramps and go, it's working. It's taking the poison out of my system.
Oh my gosh. Snake oil. Snake oil. Are we clapping? I can't wait to touch on New Orleans history because this is something that is reality. And then if we go as far as even New York and as far as even California, because California's got its ways too. It's got its ways, but not so much as like Colorado. And, there's a lot of stories I want to touch on. And I'm sure Marie Terrell 504 would love to touch on them, where there were these lovely historic criminals through our mountainsides who would have them stay at their boarding house or, their little bed and breakfast as we would know it today, or Airbnb. And they would kill their victims with their food. And strychnine was actually something used in different lots of ways. I believe I have to find the actual criminal story, but there was one of a Victorian woman who would kill her victims with rat tape paper. So it was like this, kill your rats, the sticky paper. She'd boil it down and give it to her victims. So honestly, these people thought they were getting a little extra something, and then they were out, and then it's horrible. But yeah, that's another throw the anchor in future episode.
In the 1900s, the party was over. In 1906, the federal government passed the Pure Food and Drug Act, which required medicine makers to label the ingredients in their medicines. Now you could find out for sure just how much cocaine or opium you were taking. And when people realized how much they were taking, they cut back very quickly.
If you were addicted to something, then you were addicted, and there wasn't much you could do about it anyway. But it was an attempt by the government to try and at least put more information out there so somebody could make an informed choice.
In 1914, the federal government passed the Harrison Drug Act. This was an act designed to regulate drug use. It wasn't designed to prohibit drug use, but federal law enforcement officials used it to crack down.
Yes, rat papers. That's what they were called. They were like this thing you would liquefy, I'm pretty sure, or they were sticky papers, but it's rat papers. That's what they were called from Victorian ages. I'll have to find the article. We should do a whole reaction on that. I don't know if Marie Tarot knows about it, but I remember looking into this particular, and she was an older woman who was like, you know, the head of the house, and all these lovely tourists come through, and sometimes she let people go, and other times she'd kill them while they were eating her food. So I think she put it in porridge, all kinds of things. Victorian ages were interesting, and we're talking about the late 1800s here. Now, they just mentioned 1914. What do we know about what was it again tonight? I think they said 1917. 1917 was when things really started booming and moving, and culturally in this episode, if you check it out, you can learn quite a bit, which was in the earlier episode of this podcast. 1917, before 1920, prohibition-wise, opioid use was big in Denver and whatnot. And then now we're looking here. We're talking about the drug, pharmaceuticals, all the other fun things that happened in 1914. So I see like a mad hysteria of building, booming, spending money. Like it's a market to take your money and to possibly kill you with who knows what experiments they're doing on the public. It's so interesting.
On physicians who are prescribing to addicts in order to maintain their addiction.
In fact, even when some of the over-the-counter sales of morphine and opium and other drugs was banned, people could still get them. What it did was make it a bit more expensive for them to get them, but I don't think it really cured the problem. It didn't take away the source of drugs. You could always get a prescription from your doctor, or you could just buy it on the black market.
And so the illicit drug trade really begins in the 19-teens.
Beer came out west with the German beer makers after the Civil War.
Some of the European breweries, like Bass, actually did send beer to the United States, and it made its way out to some of the mountain towns. The cost was high and the quality was low, so you had to really want that beer.
Beer in many ways is a much more complex drink than whiskey or other distilled spirits. It has a lot more ingredients. It has water, it has yeast, it has hops, which are actually really hard to come by in Colorado in the mid-19th century, and you have some sort of malted grain. And it's very fragile. Unless you pasteurize it, it will go bad very quickly.
Imagine loading up your wagon with a whole bunch of kegs. A barrel of beer is 31 gallons of liquid. That's really heavy. That's asking a lot of your ox team at the time. Come across the plains, hauling all of that, and it's not going to last you all that long.
Beer goes bad so quickly that it's much better to produce beer locally than whiskey. So in the summer of 1859, Frederick Solomon and John Good found the Rocky Mountain Brewery. And that's Denver's first brewery.
Legend has it.
If you are an alcohol drinker and you're interested in this lovely legend and information about all the breweries in Colorado, let me know in the comments below. We'll feature it because I know I want to get into the Coors beer factory. There's some really unique things that have been coming out of the mountains since early times. And if we think about culture in the United States, some people, it's not just a Colorado thing. Some people really do understand good beer does come from our mountains. It's a true thing.
That John Good brought the first hops to Denver, and that's how he earned his partnership. He brought them across the plains in an ox cart.
So they start brewing and they celebrate by giving Rocky Mountain News editor William Byers the first bottle of their first beer. One local critic called it, quote, innocent of hops, unquote. It didn't really have a hoppy flavor. So they're mostly selling it in kegs or in buckets or in whatever container they used to local saloons where they would get it on draft.
The kegs in the 19th century were wooden barrels.
because they're not able to pasteurize their beer, this is really the only way that you can get their product until people start pasteurizing it and putting it into dark glass bottles to keep it from light.
And some of these saloons were going through 10 kegs a day. Beer was about a nickel, and that was just the right price for an awful lot of people in Colorado at the time.
So 1859 is when we see Colorado's first brewery. But it's not for another decade or so that we see the brewery that most Americans associate with Colorado, and that's the Coors Brewery. So in 1872, Adolf Coors immigrates to Colorado from Germany.
You have this teenage boy that had been an apprentice at a German brewer. Well, there's a draft for the Prussian army, and this little draft dodger will end up sneaking aboard a ship. He's discovered halfway across the Atlantic Ocean, but rather than throwing him out, they make him promise to pay when he gets here. And Adolf Coors arrives in America.
And he actually first sets up shop in Denver, but he and another German immigrant, Jacob Schraler, start looking for a different brewery site.
He spent his weekends once he got here scouting around for a place to open a brewery.
They find a site in Golden near Clear Creek that is actually the site of a tannery at one point. And they essentially...
I'm so glad they're touching on this because we were just saying. And yes, you guys, I mean, this is an interesting reality that, you know, you come with all of this dream, vision, you come to this area, you are struggling. I mean, I created my business initially in California, but I have come finally full circle back to my roots and to see it come to this teeny tiny town, which was the intention. I do almost believe this is a regular Colorado way. You come with your dreams, you come with your hopes, and you built it out of almost nothing.
She start brewing what they call Schraler and Coors Golden Lager. Eventually, Coors buys out Schraler, and it becomes the Coors Brewing Company.
They were one of the smaller brewers when they first started.
They're not serving really large geographic markets, partially because beer goes bad really quickly. But if you're in Golden, it's essentially your local brewery. By 1880, they're producing a fair amount of beer, and they're actually starting to bottle their beer. And refrigerated rail cars that are kind of helping bring fresh produce from California, fresh meat from stockyards, they're also bringing beer to people in bottles from breweries that are much farther away. So Coors starts distributing to people throughout Colorado and throughout the interior West. Coloradans are always early adopters, so Prohibition is enacted in Colorado 4 years before the rest of the nation. Before Prohibition,
which, if you guys know, we're also in the country. Colorado is known for being the first state in the United States that did legalize cannabis. And we, I think, need to keep that in retrospect, what we're going to learn about over time in this little town that I live in called Garfield County, because they're really featuring more so of Denver, but it means a lot. It's an idea, a vision of people who had relocated, people who came from all over the world, knew what Colorado was about, how people built from nothing. It's really an incredible thing to know. Politics, and you tell us no, we tell you try us.
There's a ton of breweries in the United States, and they're producing a lot of different types of beer. So it's actually a fairly diverse industry. But once Prohibition becomes the law of the land in Colorado in 1916, and then the United States as a whole in 1920, brewers have to adjust to a new law very quickly.
They let out their barrel rooms as storage. They had ice businesses. Almost all of them brewed some form of near beer,
which is beer that is less than 0.5% alcohol. Coors diversified into other industries, and they had actually started doing this during World War I. They have a cement industry. The Coors family expands into real estate, and they also produce malted milk.
Coming out of Prohibition, 4 breweries survived. The first was Coors. The second was the Tivoli Union Brewery, Walters down in Pueblo, and Schneider in Trinidad.
In the Great Depression, Americans really needed a drink. And by 1933, President Roosevelt began pushing for the repeal of Prohibition. It began very slowly with a resumption of production of beer. But by the mid-1930s, state legislatures voted overwhelmingly to repeal Prohibition as a failed experiment. What America learned from Prohibition is that it's difficult to regulate social behavior on a national level.
Isn't it funny? We repeat history so often here, people who are clapping. Cheers! Cheers! I am trying to decide if I want to actually remove my plan this evening to read too much of the PDF, or do I want to jot on over to there real quick? Let me think here. I think we're going to read 2 pages tonight, which feels like a nice little intro to more of Parachute, but I'm going to keep going. I was going to pull up more on the haunted house, but I think the video I have, let me see about this one. I don't feel strong enough about the haunted Colorado. Let's see here. Hold on. I'm thinking, let's just continue this and we'll see what we do on time, guys.
In the 19th century, cannabis, it uses a painkiller. It uses kind of an anesthetic. And doctors like it because it's considered actually less dangerous than opiates. But cannabis as a medicine has some problems. It's really hard to dose. Cannabis is insoluble in water, so you can't make an injectable form, which is
Yet, sirs. They make distillants now. I believe in the future we will use cannabis as an alternative for people who just respond better to pain management. Personally, I think a lot of my listeners here, whatever platform you may be hearing this from, and even on the replay, can also agree that the future of cannabis and pain management, it's like I said earlier in this podcast tonight, I personally experienced Colorado doctors when I was pregnant being incredibly supportive to the fact that I was going to be a parent using cannabis after my son was born, and thought it was a great reality to me as a parent to have a plan and not to go to use pharmaceuticals. For me, it didn't work. For them, they were happy to see the success in my weight, my mental health, all the physical things that were positive about it. So I do think that it is nice to hear that in history, we have seen a regular response to the medical industry using cannabis, but it is true that dosing is still a problem in society. We treat it too much like recreational. The 1960s screwed us up when all of the the prohibition of cannabis happened and lack of safe access happened. So I do think we're going to be taking a walk in history when it comes to the legal ups and downs of Colorado and Western Colorado for cannabis use, because I think it's important to know in history of this area as well, to paint the picture of the drugs that were good, the drugs that were bad, the doctors that agreed, politics that came into play. And even I remember the 1990s here, it was all up and down. The doctors were good, and then you had doctors that would take your joints that you had snuck into the hospital, which is a true story my mother had, and flush them out of the toilet for you. So, reality, laws, following protocol. Here we go.
actually the most scientific way to administer drugs at the time. So you have to make a tincture, you have to make an oil out of it, or you have to kind of ingest it orally. But it's really hard to determine how much cannabis you're giving somebody. So at the end of the 19th century and the early 20th century, you start to see a new class of drugs coming out, aspirin. They come in pill form, you know what's in there, and it's easier to give those to your patients. So cannabis is kind of being replaced by other drugs by the early 20th century.
Drug use became more demonized. Certainly this had been true for the Chinese as far back as the 1870s and the 1880s. They had been stigmatized because of opium. In the 19-teens, Americans became more aware of cannabis use. Now, Americans have been taking cannabis in patent medicines for decades, but in the 19-teens, after the Mexican Revolution, as more Mexican immigrants began to move into the United States, they brought with them the practice of smoking cannabis, or as they called it, marijuana. And as opium was associated with the Chinese, marijuana use was associated with Mexicans. Cocaine by the 1920s became associated with African Americans. And so this connection between race and drug use became kind of a code for white Americans to find means to suppress people of different colors.
In the 1930s, this bureaucrat named Harry Anslinger, who is the head of the Federal Narcotics Bureau, starts focusing more and more on marijuana.
Marijuana became the #1 demon of the United States Narcotics Bureau. It was described as the most dangerous drug in America or the most dangerous drug in history. In sensational article after sensational article, as the press picks up on this crusade by the Narcotics Bureau, they talk about drug slaves and drug fiends and how one puff of marijuana will inevitably lead to insanity.
So the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937 is our first kind of federal law dealing with marijuana. It attempts to prohibit marijuana use through taxation.
Yes, I am so glad they touch on this. I knew this was coming. I find it interesting. We talked about earlier this evening so far. 1930 is when Colorado started booming in all the ways it did. As we see, what are we discussing now? 1937 is when all these things happen. And then they got their hands in it. Yet we have this uproar, and look, it's spelled the way it is. This uproar of politics. We are absolutely going to be covering future episode in this regards, because I feel like at least discussing and having your guys' views are really important in telling the story of Colorado's history.
In order to buy, distribute, or even own marijuana, you have to apply for a tax stamp from the federal government. But the government didn't really want to give these stamps out. It never really intended to create a regulated marijuana industry. The goal was essentially to prohibit cannabis through making its use and sale so difficult that people would just stop. The first federal prosecution under the Marijuana Tax Act took place in Denver in 1937. Samuel Caldwell was caught selling marijuana to a guy named Moses Baca. Neither of them had a stamp, so they were prosecuted under this new federal law. Harry Anslinger came out to see the first fruits of his labor, and so we had the first federal prosecution under the first federal marijuana law. Colorado is essentially a test case for marijuana laws. And the fact that we were one of the first places where people were punished for using marijuana, and the first place to really legalize it, shows how attitudes towards marijuana have changed. It's from the 1930s to today.
We're so far ahead of the rest of the nation in accepting recreational drug use that not everybody is comfortable with the direction that we're going.
There's still kind of a reputation that we have as being kind of this Wild West state where you can come out here and you can go around the corner and you can pick up an eighth. And so you're seeing this massive influx into Denver and other Colorado cities by people who want to join the cannabis industry, because that's what it is now. It's an industry regulated by the state of Colorado from seed to smoke.
So I want to just stop right now and showcase something real quick. Let me see if I can pull it up. So I recently bought an ounce, half ounce, I think it was. Hold on. I want to bring this receipt up because I think it's really important to kind of share with you guys. I can't zoom in on it, but maybe you can see it. Let's see here. So what you're looking at, guys, let me pull my fantastic little comment out of here. Hide current comment. So if you're looking at this, is a breakdown about how much I spent, how many grams. I don't know where you are, guys. I don't know where you're staying, but our tax is very cheap. And I find it interesting because I remember back in the day paying $20 a gram. To spend as little as I have lately on medicine is just a whole new freaking world. I'm very grateful to Colorado. I think it's important for people to really understand that innovation is something I think really Colorado, it stands its testament. Innovation in a lot of different ways. Medicine, politics, groundbreaking. I mean, we are trailblazers. Similar in the Oregon Trail way. You know, we are the ones came for the gold rush or came for new found freedoms. You know, it's just a whole new, let me see if I can pull it out of here. A whole new way to really take it in. Okay, let's get back to the good stuff because I feel like this is becoming a wonderful episode, you guys.
It is so ironic to watch how history can resemble itself over time. This was a debate we were having in the 19-teens. What kind of access should you have to drugs like marijuana? How much personal responsibility should you have to be able to use drugs And how does that responsibility affect society? What is the cost of that responsibility? That was the debate they were having with Lydia Pinkham's tonic back in the 1800s, or the regulation of cocaine and opium in the 19-teens.
What we've learned today is that these substances are addictive, they cause social problems, and hopefully we've moved on beyond a lot of what they used to do in those days.
Drugs are not good, and they're not bad, and they're not neutral. They are what we make of them. Will we end up in a good place with how we use and regulate recreational drugs? I don't think we know. I think that's one of the exciting things about living in Colorado right now, is we're living through history and we're working this out for ourselves.
I think that's such a great way to segue, honestly, into the reality that it was 2 hours and 29 minutes tonight. I want to read a little bit of our lovely PDF, but I also want to give you guys a visual of the prehistoric living spaces in Western Colorado. Now, I'm going to roll up another one for myself. I hope you guys are joining me with the Mary and your Joe, maybe too. If you are, let me know what you're toking on tonight. Thank you all for joining. And without further ado, let me pull this lovely next video up. And then we're going to end on, because it will segue just so beautifully, on some of the physical attributes of the housing that existed where I live today. So let's get into this. Hopefully it's playing.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ike Rakeski, and I'm a librarian in information services. And what I'm going to be doing today is talking about
He's actually been featured on another video. The quality of this video kind of is shitty. I'm sorry about that. It's more so about the audio, understanding the history. So take it with a grain of salt that I'm sorry the audio is not great, but hang tight, guys.
Historic living spaces of Western Colorado.
Ooh, yummy. You're smoking on some wedding cake, UFO. I'm about to roll up some Kush. I have a kitty in the background if you hear some noise. They are about, I don't know, 8 weeks old. Hello, Rose. What you doing, Rose? We have Rose and Shanti. If you ever hear me say their names, that's my lovely kitties. So let's get into this beautifulness. I do love our book cliffs. I do love our mesas. They are gorgeous.
And what this is going to be focusing on are some different archaeological or prehistoric sites in Mesa County and Montrose County. This is not going to be an exhaustive list of those sites by any means, but I wanted to focus on some sites that were, excavated and researched in the early part of the 20th century. First, what I wanted to do was talk about two prominent archaeologists in Colorado. That first archaeologist that we're going to be talking about was Clarence Thomas Hurst, and he was born on June 20th, 1895 in Kingston, Kentucky. He was a zoologist by training, and he received his degrees, both his BA and MA, from Western State College in Gunnison. After completing his education, he taught at a public school and was an assistant professor at Wills College in California. In 1928, he returned to Western State College to begin his teaching career, which would last for 21 years until his death in 1949. Early in his career at Western State, he took on responsibility for curating a collection of artifacts from the Southwest. And in doing so, a deep interest was developed in the study of archaeology, which illustrated to him the potential for damage to sites via vandalism or pot hunting. C.T. Hurst was also the founder of the Colorado Archaeological Society. The next archaeologist that I want to just talk about for just a little bit was Hannah Marie Wormington. And she was born in Denver on September 5th, 1914. She received degrees from both Denver University and Radcliffe College, and Wormington was only the second woman to be admitted to Harvard. Radcliffe awarded her an MA in 1950 and a PhD in 1954.
That's so incredible. So, like I was saying on this episode, we have so many amazing people that came to this area. I'm going to do a whole episode, I think, on both Hannah Marie, and I also think we need to very much cover Molly Brown. And then there's another woman I'll be covering who's a Western Slope African American, ex-slavery. It's incredible, the stories that I have found about Colorado citizens. I hope you guys are enjoying. I'm sorry if the audio is a little rough. We're going to get through this. Let me see if I can. I'm not going to watch the whole thing, but let's. Or should we wait? Let's wait. Let's wait on this one. I feel we should take another turn. Let's turn the car around. It's like going to rallies and then you go somewhere else. Go to, I don't know. I feel like some seasoned fries. It's the only reason that I mention rallies. Hold on a second, guys. Let's see here. Let's see. I want to go back over here. Okay, so we have. Is this the one we should do? I think we're going to wait on the rest of the Colorado experience for water. Let me click out of that. I have a feeling there's another good one. So give me a second. Is this the one? Oh, I think I found one. More Doc Holiday information. Is this the one? Is this one? Let's see here. I should have looked up Buffalo Bill because I know he's also part of it. Is this the one, guys? Oh, yes, this is the one. Okay. Let me pick this up. Hold on a second. There we go. And here we go.
There's a symbol of the times beneath me here. In the last some years, the offerings here have been the empty whiskey bottles, the occasional rose, which I do grandly appreciate, and pennies and nickels and dimes. I'm here to tell you that I can testify that the strength, the economic strength of the company is improving here. The country is prospering. I'm starting to get quarters again. Well, good day there. I came up here so you could see this beautiful city. I came here in May of 1887, and as with any city that I ever came to, I made an economic contribution here. But here's the interesting part. Oh, I did gambling games. I played faro and I played five-card stud down here, and certainly money circulates in the community. But this is the interesting part. I contributed to this community even though I am deceased. I'm the number 3 attraction in this fair city. People come to the cabin, they come to the hot springs pool, and they come to Doc Holliday's grave. And I see a great many of the visitors here. And it's sort of an interesting thing. I'm still recognized after 129 years of this. Oh, there's always somebody says, well, I thought you were a dentist. What are you doing as a gunfighter? Well, the answer to that is simply this. Man has to make a living, and I had good hands. I made good money as a dentist. I made fair to middling money as a gunfighter, if you think about it, but I certainly was never a bad man. I never did none of this business. I went out with the posses against the bad men, but I myself, I was never involved in that business.
So, misinterpretations here. I think that says a lot. He may have made friends with those people. He might have even worked through the bad clan, as we'll learn, because they came with suggestions of new clients. I don't know. Or I was even thinking, how do we know that Doc Holliday wasn't stealing the gold out of people's teeth? I'm just saying, as a dentist and all.
An honest artist on the circuit, and I became a gambler because I had good hands and I had the skills, and I made more money at gambling than I ever did at dentistry. I'm a real doctor, but there's a lot of people. Who assume that I was a medical doctor, but I am not. I'm a doctor of dental surgery. 1872, the Pennsylvania College of Dental Surgery. Dr. Elihu R. Pettit was my professor of operative dentistry, and Dr. Edward McGregor was my professor of mechanical dentistry, and I graduated with my thesis, Diseases of the Teeth, in March of 1872. You know, folks ask me why I come to Glenwood Springs. Well, I came to Glenwood Springs as much as anything to stay alive. After that business in Tombstone down there, they killed Morgan, they crippled Virgil Earp, and they was out to get us. Well, I come to Colorado to as much as anything to survive. But the honest truth is I came to this city here in the end to die. I come over here from Leadville. I'd been up to Manny Hyman's and, I worked up there at the Monarch and several other places, but the consumption come on strong. The whiskey quit doing it, and I started into the laudanum. It wasn't the best thing I ever done, but I come here to die. That's why I'm here. You know, there's always been this discussion about whether I'm actually planted in this here cemetery. Now, the fact of the matter is I am, but not down here in this grave with the beautiful people of this town. I'm up there in the Potter's Field with the likes of Elmira Keir and others, because that's where we were put in them days. I wasn't the most popular person that ever was put in the cemetery here. Although, I must say, I had plenty of friends and stuff to make sure that my planting was appropriate. But no, I'm here. I'm just lost. You ain't going to find me. My family come out here in 1957 to get me, and they didn't get me. I'm still here, and I'm happy right where I am.
I will be bringing you guys to that location in the 2022s, so you guys can at least see it from your own eyes nowadays. See what it looks like around. This was a video. I have kitties. Kitties. No. 2017, this was put out. I think this is awesome the way that they've put it together, giving his voice, giving his history. I hope you guys are enjoying it.
Strangely enough, one of the interesting things about living in this cemetery or dying here, however you want to look at that business, is that every October they do a thing called the Ghost Walk, and they bring people up here 30 at a time around through these graves at night with lanterns and flashlights. The setting that you're seeing here is a portion of a theater production by way of the spirits of Glenwood Pioneer Cemetery. And this occurs each fall around Halloween, the 3 weekends of Halloween, Friday and Saturday nights. And 4 performances a night. We bring 30 people up here at a group, stand around here, and they are regaled with the stories of Dr. Holliday and 6 or 5 other ghosts up here. And they wander around the cemetery for a while, and then we send them back down the mountainside for hot cider and homemade cookies. And the proceeds go to the Historical Society in our fair city that you see behind me, Glenwood Springs, Colorado. Come see us. It's a very interesting way to get your history.
I think that was an excellent performance to share with you guys. So now that we know that 1937 was the cutoff so far, we've talked about time so far. And as early as 1873, I believe it was. Well, Let's now go and dive into those lovely documents tonight. Some of you are only here for those. Others of you are here for the whole fun conversation. Let's chew off some fun things. So I was given the opportunity to share these fantastic documents. Let me see if I can make this a little bit clearer. Hold on one second. So, as we know, let me pull this back up here. 1 second. Sorry, you guys. I have little kitties making such loud noises, and I'm like, let's put them outside the area. So I'm going to give you guys another little visual while I go take care of the kitty situation, and then I will be right back and we'll jump into this. So just hang tight. If you are enjoying tonight, I'm going to actually run over here real quick. So let me put you on mute, everybody. All right, everybody.
With member
Let's get into this fun stuff.
And one of Colorado's most haunted places is the Hotel Colorado in Glenwood Springs. The Hotel Colorado was built in 1893 as a tourist destination for Western Colorado. The basement of the building was used as a morgue during World War II when the hotel was converted into a naval hospital. Staff and other people that have been down there have seen people in the windows. In room 661, which is one of the tower rooms, there's a woman in a floral dress who will stand over your bed. She has also shut the windows when people have opened them. Open the windows, leave, come back, the windows are shut. On the main floor, there are two different men who are suspected to be the ghosts. One is the original owner, Walter Devereaux. The other is the guy who was the manager in 1893 when the place opened and then became the owner until 1927. His name is E.E. Lucas. And their presence is kind of detected by occasionally seeing a man and smelling cigar smoke. So they think that
I find it really, really interesting that that particular room that my friend stayed in is one of the featured original architects. So his family, to have such a nice little home away from home, living quarters, and so luxurious, and for her to feel so much in that room. It's exciting to share it with you guys who are listening.
That these guys are sort of watching over the hotel from the lobby.
So without further ado, we have the kiddies away. We're able to start our PDF tonight. As you guys know or may not know, I was given the opportunity from a historical society local to feature this lovely PDF featuring 173 lovely curated documents explaining the history of Parachute. Does it show me full screen? Let's see how we do that. Fit to page? That's not a good idea. That's a good idea. Okay, so let me see how I can do this. So the last time we started, which is on First List We Forget, a short story of early Grand Valley, Colorado, originally called Parachute, Colorado. Let me see here 1 second. I was thinking I was going to show another picture, but we'll wait for all that. So initially, this was put out in 1973 when it was all put together. I'm not going to reread all these pages, but I do encourage you guys to take a look at this video at the bottom of the description. I always will encourage you guys to click the PDF, read it yourself. And they are interested in hearing from you guys if you have more questions. So feel free to contact from the link that says PDF in my description area. So we're going to jump down because the last time we were on, we started our lovely journey. Finished it off on this page is page 20, technically 11. Let me make sure I'm correct on this. Believe I am. Hold on. It's so sensitive. That's why I gotta make it smaller. Okay. So I'm gonna read. Let's do this. Start here. Okay. So we're going to go to 21 then, because 20 was where we left off. There we go. And I believe it was somewhere around here. Mr. Hill Liker and was the first depot agent and Parachute in 1890. He took up land in Parachute Creek, a place still known as the Hill Liker place. Now, I was just telling a friend today that I am going to go ahead and go to the local places I know and ask for any local settlement maps. I can, really look at the initial first settlers through name, because it seems like this whole PDF is referencing by first settler pioneers' first names. So, and last family names, obviously. So if you guys know anything and you're listening about these particular families, please get a hold of me through the bottom of the screen. You will see on this video if you're watching, or in the description area of video replay, you will see I have included my email address. So get a hold of me. Or if you would like a copy of this PDF, you're more than welcome to get a hold of me and I'll send the link over to you directly. Okay. Here, let's get back to the good stuff. So we're just going to skim off the back end of what we finished off on and continue on to the next page. Hold on a second here. 20, here we go. Well, that's not what we want, people. Give me a second. We have technical difficulty. Really? Sorry, guys. My internet's dragging for a second. One more minute. Okay, here we go. So let's start off with 12. I think that's where we're going to need to go. Yes, because 11 would have been 20. So let's just finish off in this little part. What happened here? Hold on. Oh, it's really dragging. Sorry, guys. Bear with me. All right, we're not going to use my internal mouse because it's messing up, guys. All right. Is that right? There we go. Okay, thank goodness. So, well, this is perfect. Here we go. So it's page 12, technically. 20 is where we're ending off. Parachute Creek is often swollen by the heavy rains or clouded bursts in the summertime. And depending on the snowfall in the hills in the winter, may get quite high during the spring runoff. In the spring of 1884, the creek was the highest in the memory of any in the area. To cross the creek, one had to go horseback and swim their horses, and the creek remained high. Could not be crossed safely that year until early in July. Can you guys imagine, as a pioneer person coming to this area, you've done all you could, and then all of a sudden this whole situation. I'm sure people warned them who didn't want them to leave their initial homeland. Here we go. Life here was primitive and rugged, for essentially happy as the homesteaders had found a place they liked and were busy creating a future for themselves. And their families, everything was new and unspoiled, and the people free to plan and build a community. Very few came with wealth, and as everybody in the same boat financially, they were all high neighbors. They were all neighbors and acted accordingly. They were soon able to raise much of their food, and wild meat was plentiful. But cash was at times necessary, so men would often go away to work someplace, especially through the winter or in the summer, and the men would stay home and clear the land of sagebrush, build ditches for irrigation, raise livestock, or do the million other things necessary to do in a new land. And the women would work away, earning money for seed, fruit, trees, and other necessities. Some of these women found employment in Aspen, a boom town at the time, where they did sewing, washing, ironing, waited tables, did housework, and were otherwise employed. And the beautiful hay or grain fields and orchards and gardens were their reward for the months spent away from home. Aspen also an excellent market for the kinds of fruit and garden produce, and two boys who took advantage of this opportunity to increase their farm income were Chris Deere and Adolph Wheeler. Before 1890, when the railroad was finally extended on west to Parachute, most people coming into this area by train came as far as Newcastle and on down here by stage or some sort of hired rig. But most came in covered wagons, and near as we could find out that the only person still living here in 1972 who came in this covered wagon is Cora Wheeler. Baumgartner. 1890, the greater part of the land on the creek had been filled on the water and adjacent. Most ranchers had now their land in cultivation and were growing herds of sheep and cattle. Because of their proximity to the acres and acres of open range and the ease of which the stock came to be driven to the range, most ranchers and their own glitches leading to the hills. The raising of livestock soon became and has continued to be the chief agricultural pursuit. And life sometimes became too hard for a few of these pioneers. And at no formal and as no formal cemeteries were planned until years later, burials were usually made in a peaceful, secluded spot on the home ranch or some favorite location, which would probably never be molested, which means technically desecrated. One such grave that was of a pioneer mother remains today on a little bluff just to the east of the road, high above and overlooking the valley. This grave remains unmarked for many years, but was cared for by many friends and neighbors until sometime during the 1930s. A son of the deceased remains to the valley, and after contacting Baumgartner family, who had so faithfully cured for the little plot of earth, erected a stone with the following inscription: Jane Brooks, wife of F. Steele, dead dead June 8th, 1891, age 62. Two school districts were originated in Parachute Creek to accommodate the upper and lower half of Valley. And the book, let's see here, the Book Cliff Lower and Grenly Upper School houses were built. I feel like I read this. Hold on. I think we've already read this, guys. Let's go back, which is a great example. Oh, yep, we have. So let's get back. I messed up. It's not the side 20. It's over here 20. That's okay. That's good. Recaps are good. Recaps are good, people. All right, let's see here. Is this the one? Nope, we already did that one. Did we do that one? Let me make sure. I don't feel like we did this one. Let me see here. So Parachute Creek home. Years after the creek was settled and prospering in 1921 to erect a movement to settle the rich and right land on the Book Cliffs was started. The soil up there is rich and productive, and several local people and many from the east had tried their luck at farming, mainly because of the inaccessibility of the area. The trails in the mountains were long, narrow, and winding, and the lack of water for irrigation. Most claims were gradually abandoned. Some of the potential mountain ranchers remained on their farms in the valley, and others who stayed here found employment on ranches, in the schools, and the railroad, or in various other occupations. They made homes here and helped to further develop the county, or the country, in many ways, become real assets to the community. Now, in 1972, many of the ranches of Parachute have been sold off to oil companies engaging in research, hopefully to find a feasible means of extracting oil from the mountains of shale in the region. The companies need the water from the creek for processing the shale, so the water rights go with the land. Range rights with all surface rights are also often bought by oil companies or sold by the owners independently of land and sales. If the oil companies do not purchase the range rights, they usually bought by other ranchers in the area. In some instances, families continue to make their homes on their former ranches after selling them. And in other cases, the oil companies have employed good ranch hands to keep up the ranches productive and the range herds growing and improved. The residents of Parachute Creek have always been proud of their places and enjoyed their lives here, believing it to be a really favored spot in the United States of America. And I believe Miss Freeland expressed the feelings of all of these living on Parachute Creek when, and on the occasion of the 15th wedding anniversary of 1954, she remarked, "I have watched the moon come up over Parachute Creek for 50 years now, and I know there is no more beautiful sight on earth." I think that's so gorgeous. The Underwood family. Let's get to know them, guys. The Underwood family, with the covered wagon in which they made their long trip from Missouri to Battlement, Mesa. Pictured from left to right are Hildy Underwood and Ward Underwood, Uncle Jimmy Underwood, Miss Underwood, holding Myrtle Underwood, Kathy, Nellie Underwood, Hefty, and Loretta Underwood, Bateman, in the front Brightman of Miss Underwood, and John Underwood between the two horses, Cal and Ide Underwood. So let's look at this picture for a second here, guys. See if I can blow it up just a little bit. It's a little dark, but I think it's just a testament to show really what this land was. All right, let's go through this. All right, here we go. Across the Colorado River, And from Grand Valley Parachute and rising abruptly from the south bank of the river lies Battlement Mesa, extending south to the mountain, east of Morazana Mesa, and west of to the Dry Creek. The foothills of the mountains are covered with cedar or juniper, and as the elevation increases, pinyon, I'm sure I'm saying that, pine and aspen cover the slopes, making a beautiful background for the fields of alfalfa grain or grasses of the ranches of the mesa. The soil here is all volcanic origin, which mixed over the years with the it looks like humus of decaying vegetation. That says hummus, does it not? Humus, made it especially productive. There are several theories as to how the name Battlement was given to this area, Mesa and the mountain, but following seems to be the most pursuable. Along the top fence of the mountain overlooking the mesa is a rock formation, which closely resembles the battlements of old which form the upper walls of many castles, of where the upper parapets of the defective wall surround a city or fortress. Interesting. Okay. The early settlers started coming into the area about the same time as into Parachute Creek area. In the early 1880s, while we don't have the exact date of arrival of many of these pioneers, we are able to fix the time from some of the things they do here in Parachute community. Mr. George Cipparell, hold on, I lost my place, who came from Maine, was an expert woodsman and helped Mr. Halbert, Hilbert built the first house in Parachute Creek the spring of 1884, a cabin of hand-hewed wood logs. Mr. Cipparell's skills with the axe soon became known as his services were in the constant demand in the valley. As other new citizens built homes, Mrs. Cipparell's services as a midwife were much in demand, too, as many new arrivals made their appearance in the area, and many of those now considered our senior citizens owe their very lives to all her skills, kindness, and efficiency. Two brothers, Ben and Nels Good, were also early arrivals from Maine. Ben Good did not remain long. But while here, Mr. Good, that's so funny, built a cabin in a glitch along the East Fork of Parachute. And this little valley is still known as Ben Good Glitch. The Niels Good family remained here and took an active interest in the affairs of the community. In 1885, Dr. C.L. Hayward, of his wife, Minnie, and was a sister of Ben and Nils Good, also came to the Mesa from Maine, and were cordially welcomed not only by the people on Battlement Mesa, by the whole area, as the new community had a real doctor, whose services were solely needed in the new land. Dr. Hayward was nice, kind, as well as a good doctor, and his wife as an asset to him in the many ways in his practice, especially in the caring for new babies and the new mothers. The new Haywards onward and improved several different places on Battlement Mesa and Wallace Creek, and it has often been said you can always tell where Dr. Hollis has lived, as there are shade trees, roses, and orchards growing there. Oh, that's lovely. Mr. William Duplass, I butcher these names, follow along, don't judge. And you should also check in the description area, because I always put the links to all the things I share in my videos. So who was born and raised in Bangor, Maine, and had met and married a girl from Agro, Wisconsin? decided to come west, and in 1880 moved to Newcastle, and 11 years later, in 1891, came on down to Battlement Mesa, where several other families from Maine had settled. The original name of the family was Duplass, but has always been spelled Duplice by the families here, except on the very early tombstones. Jim Gardner was his child with his child Roland O. James, and Harry came from Missouri in 1892, going first to the Colburn area and then over to the valley where he where he located what is known as Dr. Hayward's place near Pete and Bill Glutch. Later settling in Battlement Mesa, Mr. Gardner's wife had died, and he later married Doubly Girl. The Dudley family, too, had come from the east. The mother and father died early, but two boys, Joe and Jake, lived on the home place on Battlement Mesa until their deaths not many years ago. R.O. Gardner married Belle Evans, who had come with her family from McCook, Nebraska. In 1894, the railroad had came through here. By 1894, but the Evans family came with a wagon trail of folks, who wanted to bring their livestock. That's insane. Trailing with them through Battlement Mesa. Along the way, they met and enjoyed another wagon trail in which the Six Cox family, that's a tongue twister, was traveling. The Cox family settled in Parachute Creek. Thomas Clark from Baltimore and J. Foster Jennings from New York each developed good ranches on the western part of Battlement Mesa. Quickly early, and secured one of the first water rights on Battlement Mesa Creek. The ranches were later consolidated by a new owner, but have ever since been known as Clark and Jennings Ranch, one of the best in the area. Hold on, guys. Okay, let's see here. Where did we go? Here we go. Also, in 1887, the O'Toole family came to the Mesa from Leadville and bought out two squatters, making one homestead of the two. I'm guessing that would be a term used in the back in the day, the squatters, because they were squatters if you didn't have that actual right. You're squatting on the property. It's easier to get rid of you unless you've already built a home. That's interesting. Okay, making one homestead of the two places into what has always been known as the O'Toole place on the north part of Battle Mesa. Mr. O'Toole went to Leadville and worked in the mines, part of the time using his wagons to improve new ranches. Wesley Snit and his wife, Mary, were also early settlers on Battlement Mesa, and it was at their home at the Home Culture Club was organized in the spring of 1894, with most of the charter members residents of Battlement Mesa, Mary Schott, Drusilla Slipler, Elmer DeWitt, Lucy, that's a familiar name we've seen, Lucy DeWitt, Elizabeth DeWitt, Kenny, Corelda, Inez Good, and Minnie Hayward. Mrs. I hate that name, was also one of the first teachers in Battlement Mesa School. I'm pretty sure I can get some pictures for you guys because I do know I've been in the tiny little school and there's tons of historic pictures in there. I'll try to get some for the future. Here we go. Walter and Clara Vance came to Battlement Mesa in the early days and lived for several years on part of what was known as the Clark and Jenny Ranch, finally producing what in later years has been known as Manistee Place. After a few years of farming, they moved into town where Mr. Vance owned the lively stable and draying business, and Mrs. Vance and daughter Jessie managed a hotel, Oh, I need to find out where that was. Many residents still recall the wonderful meals they served, which featured homemade bread, pies, donuts, and other freshly baked pastries. Along in the 1890s, the Jess Carell family arrived from Missouri. Mr. Carelli's first wife had died from tuberculosis, an uncontrolled disease in those early days. And he later married a Dory girl who came west to a healthier climate for his family. Mr. Curley was an expert woodsman, and several early log homes in the area were a product of his trade, of his time, patience, and skill. George Curley and one of the sons recall how, as a child, he admired and loved the wild horses in Battlement Mesa. And in one of the terrible winters in the 1890s, obviously, when the snow was so deep it covered the fences, so the children walked to school over the top of those barriers. The poor horses could not find food, and many literally starved to death. The emaciated bodies of those beautiful, proud, free creatures dotting the mesa the next spring was a memory George could never quite ease from his mind. Another early Battlement Mesa family was the DeWitt family. Frank and his wife, Lucy, his mother, and his sister, and who came from the East in the early 1890s. They were an asset to the growing community, taking an interest in all the worthwhile projects, and especially anything of the educational nature. Miss Lucy DeWitt was was at one time superintendent of the Garfield County Schools. The Dick McGruitt family also came to the Mesa quite early, and located on land across from the schoolhouse. Oh, I know where that is. Oh, we're going to feature that. I'll show pictures on the next one. A son, Dick, later built was now known as the Reuben Nordstead home. He, like Miss DeWitt, was interested in politics and was Garfield County assessor for many years. In 1895, Alexander C. Gunn bought some sagebrush land just north of the main mesa. South of the river, Mr. Gunn was a friendly and well-educated bachelor, an excellent carpenter, and many buildings in the area are mute testimonies of his skill. In 1905, after improving his place, he married Miss Fay Poe, dining and widow. They then worked together and made their home one of the most attractive in the area. They were active in the community affairs and at the Methodist Church for many years. Mr. Gunn died in 1943. At the age of 93, Mr. Gunn then moved into town, and our home there was also a place of lovely flowers and shrubs. The John D. Spencer family came to Battlement Mesa from the San Luis Valley and bought the mailing place at the extreme west end. It looks like Mailing Place, at the extreme west end of the Mesa. They were interested in raising cattle, and in the early cowmen, marveled at Mr. Spencer's ability to build a quick, hot fire of sage brush and then have a branding iron ready for the use while they still were rustling wood to build a fire. Mr. Spencer had come from an area where wood was scarce and had learned through necessity to use any fuel available to good advantage. The Spencers brought their brand here with them. The 222, not in use now, that we can find. Sue Joshua Herwick was also a name associated in many ways with the history of Battlement Mesa. Mr. Herwick, he had met Mr. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Hold on. Yeah, that's okay. Hold on. Mr. Herwick had met Mr. Hayden and the surveyor in Denver in 1879, when Mr. Hayden was buying his supplies, barrels, or potatoes. Of potatoes, one was one of them, for his trips to this area. His trips to the area. Oh, interesting. So they had to buy their vegetables and that's interesting. To make the first government survey. Mr. Herwick had always wanted to come here and see for himself what this country was really like. So in 1888, he arrived on the Mesa. He left shortly after to help in the construction of the state bridge across the Colorado River. In 1889, at a little settlement of the same name, Mr. and Miss Herwick later returned and located on the Mesa where they raised their family. A son, Guy, was the first white child born on the Mesa. Garvis Harwood, son of Dr. and Miss Harwood, was born a few weeks later. The second native son, Mr. Herrick, was for years a United States land commissioner, and several people in this area made a final proof on the homesteads before him a decided convinced as this saved them the long trip to Glenwood Springs. In 1893, the Blason cannot say that name, the Blasons family, consisting of the father, mother, and two sons, Rudy and Fred, left Marienberg, Germany, oh, that's intense, and came to the United States to find a new home. After mining in different places in Colorado, Leadville for one, they came to Battlement Mesa, where they made a permanent home. The father died after a few years here, and Rudy drowned in 1911. Miss Warringen, I'm sure that's how it's said, and son Fred worked the ranch profitably for years. And after his mother's death, Fred remained at the Mesa ranching until he died. An immigrant boy born in Marnhead, I'm saying it wrong, Germany in 1888, who took advantage of the opportunities the new land had to offer. Windsor Wells, a bachelor and another early resident of the Mesa, was not an educated man, but was quite interested in all the kind of livestock, especially horses, and studied their diseases and ailments. He became a veterinarian of sorts, and his services were much in demand throughout the area. Another early name on Battlement Mesa was Jim Revell, a bachelor recluse who owned the land next to the river below the O'Toole place. Instead of building his home on the Mesa, he built a small cabin down over the bluff on the riverbank. The George Paramour family were also early settlers and lived on various places on Battlement Mesa and helped improve and develop the places where they lived. Some of the other very early names on Battlement Mesa were Albert, Huntley, Stillwell, Mangling, and Ward. And we have very little information about on these families, as they were very few remaining who knew them, and to their families are gone from the area, and their addresses are unknown. There are probably others who have overlooked intentionally, but a debt of gratitude is due to all of them for the part in the development of this most desirable place to live. In April 1900, the Hunter and Corner Wasson families came to Parachute, and Sam Wasson and Mr. Hunter bought the place on the Battlement Mesa below O'Toole Place. And a year later, Mr. Watson filled a desert claim on 160 acres west of the O'Toole Ranch and extending south to Morrisana Road. A ranch road in the late years has been known as the Lee Tomlin Place. The Connor family lived on what is known as the Harry Underwood Place until 1905, when they moved into Parachute. When city Water lines were installed in the Grand Valley. In 1910, the water supply was like, and still is, from the clear, pure springs located in on what were the Revelle and the Wasson places. In 1901, James Underwood and his wife, Adelia, I think that's it, Adela, I don't know, and other children arrived by covered wagon from Missouri. Mr. Underwood was a veteran of the war between the states and has lost an eye in the conflict, a constant reminder of his contribution to the preservation of a united country. Miss Underwood took a great interest in the school and for years served as a member of the school board. In 1903, C.W. Vaughan came to the Mesa from New York. He was a refined, well-educated man who had been a professor in a boys' seminary in the East and had been forced to give up teaching on account of his health. He bought a piece of land across from what is known as the Nordstrom Place and set out a big orchard of what were surprised to be extra good cherry trees. But when they came into bearing, they were an ordinary sour fruit, and he received no return from his investment. However, over the years, the place has known as a cherry park. Although the trees have all died and no traces remain of cherry orchard, Mr. Vaughan was the first mail carrier of the Grand Valley. Mr. Carl Green and family left Deer Creek in eastern Colorado and drove covered wagons through to Battlement Mesa in 1905. Mr. Green and his son Bob, who were 14 years old at the time, each drove a team of wagons over the narrow mountain roads, over the divide to the western slope. The Greens had known the Davidson family in the Deer Creek, and it was from them they purchased their new home on the Mesa. The house was a large one-room cabin that Mr. George Perlmutter had built when he first homesteaded the place. Some of our senior citizens remember the good times they enjoyed in the cabinet when the Greens were gracious hosts at the neighborhood dances, moving the furniture back against the walls or outside, weathering permitting. Mr. Green later built a comfortable two-story house on the ranch, which is presently owned by the Marvin Martin family. After selling to the Green family, the Davidsons bought a place in what is known as the Hayes Glitch. I think I'm saying that wrong. Sorry, guys. Where they lived for years, and most desirable family in the growing Parachute community. In 1906, Mr. and Mrs. and Mr. Hold on a second, guys. Hang on. All right. In 1906, Mr. and Mrs. John Nordstrom and their young growing family came to Battlement Mesa to make their home and bought a place just north of the cemetery. And Mr. and Mrs. Nordstrom were both born in Sweden and had come with their families to Aspen in early days, where they met and were later married. After the silver panic of 1893, when many of the mines around Aspen closed and miners moved away, there were many lonely homes abandoned and left for sale. The Nordstroms bought one of these and rebuilt it into their place on Battlement Mesa. Along about this time, the Thomas J. Milner family came to Battlement Mesa also, and they lived for many years on what is of the late known as the Jack Morrow place. Maurice E. Morrow, who had spent his early life in Indiana and Illinois, and had been on his own since he was 13 years of age, came to Colorado in 1884, locating near Glenwood Springs. Mr. Morrow had always been interested in music and had worked his way through school and was an accomplished musician and excellent elementary school teacher. In 1882, Mr. Morrow married Cora M. Geyer, who too was a musician. Mr. Morrow was interested in politics and in 1897 was elected as county commissioner for Garfield County from his district. In 1906, the Morrows came to Battlement Mesa and bought a ranch. And from a Mr. Steinberg and a place earlier owned by Mrs. Fitch Simons, that's German as ever, or Austrian some way, and for many years raised hay and cattle with his sons, Clyde and Harnell. Jack, continuing the cattle business until their death a few years ago. In 1908, Ed Manhaffey and the family left the little town in Ivanhoe, Oklahoma, and started on their way to Battlement Mesa, a place they had been told so much about by relatives, the Vansons, who had been here several years and who thought this was one of the finest locations to have found in the West. They drove through from Oklahoma in a spring wagon, coming through New Mexico on west over Wolf Creek Pass, through Durango and Cortez, and then north to Grand Valley, enjoying some of the most beautiful, unspoiled scenery in the world. They located on Battlement Mesa, building up a large flock of sheep and taking a great interest in the affairs of the community for many years. I think that's so profound. I hope you guys are enjoying. I think we're going to end here tonight on this last little page. The Grand Valley News of March 7th, 1914 carries an item into the Society Notes, telling of the organization of the Battlement Mesa Sewing Club. On February 20th, at the home of Miss Haffney, organized for the sole purpose of promoting sociability. Early in 1910, the Charles Stott family left South Dakota by covered wagon on their way to California. When they reached Pueblo, Colorado, they were all quite weary from the trip, and so Mr. went on to the California by train, leaving his family in to rest while he looked for a location in the central state he liked. What he could see of Colorado West as he went through. So when he returned to Pueblo, he told his family he wanted help them deciding where. He told this to his family, but wanted them to help in deciding where they should make their future home. They then continued their trip over the Rockies and down the Grand Colorado River Valley to Parachute, where they all agreed they could be no nicer place to live. They purchased a ranch near the river on Battlement Mesa from Mr. Hallberg, on which they built an attractive home, planted an orchard and fields of hay, and grain, in many ways made this an attractive home where they lived, lived for about 40 years. In March 1980, T.C. Bailey and his young wife and daughter came to Battle Mesa from Walsenburg, Colorado, and bought from the Boyd and Vogue what is better known as the Clark and Jenny Ranch. They lived here a few months and then purchased the Isis place where they made their home for many years, and where their daughter Beatrice and husband Cal Underwood later made their home, but which is now owned by the Raleigh gardener. Mr. Bailey also bought Jackie's pocket a glitch over the gardener. Wait, hold on. Over the hill from the Isaac place. He bought the high mesa just south of the Battlement Mesa from Mr. Elish II. A mesa still known as the Bailey Mesa. Mr. Bailey and the Otis Tidwell bought the Dole Brothers and Smith store in Grand Valley, which they later sold to Philip Waterman. After his wife's death, Mr. Bailey's married Miss Mary Allison, and they purchased the Stude place when Mr. and Mrs. Stude retired and moved to Rifle. The early 1920s saw the families coming to Battlement Mesa, many of whom still live in the area. The Kerr family in 1921 and the Williams and the Williams family in March 1922. All the Monroe County in Tennessee purchased the land across from the schoolhouse, which he had been known as McGrick Place. The Grand Colorado River was somewhat of a barrier between the new little town of Parachute and the rural communities of Battlement, Mesa, Morsana, and Wallace Creek until 1891, when a wooden bridge was constructed across the river just at the foot of the Battlement Mesa near where an old Ute Indian ford had been used by the pioneers during the years preceding, and the buildings of the bridge in 1918. A sturdy steel structure replaced the wooden bridge and has been in use continually since then. This is interesting because I was actually wondering about this morning when I drove over it. However, in the early days before dams were built further up the river, and the runoff in the spring from the heavy snows in the mountains, and the preceding winter would still swell the normal flow of the river, and the water would often make a lake in the lowland near the bridge, covering the floor of the structure. And so this was impassable. This made it imperative to find something, other ways to get into town. And as necessity is the mother of invention, various ideas for crossing the temporary lake were born. One such idea was probably borrowed from the Indians. When Dr. Howard cut one side from a log and patiently hollowed it out with an axe, and by burning some oars and had a really seaworthy craft with which to transported his family. Oh, he made a boat. How funny. Like a little tiny, oh my goodness. His family and others who carried the risk of crossing the high water. The first schoolhouse on Battlement Mesa district was a small log built in 1889. We're going to end on that tonight. I think it's a great place to start. Looks like we were doing about 10 to 15 pages at a time. So let's keep in mind, let's look at this page. What's the number? The number is 27, guys. So I hope you have enjoyed tonight. It's very, very interesting. Thank you so much, UFO. Yes, I'm getting tired myself, sir. And all of you all who are listening, thank you so much for joining. If you're listening to the replay, let me know. Again, I do encourage you to check out the description area. It will probably be updated tomorrow if it's not updated tonight. Otherwise, you guys have a good night. I will see you all and listen in for the next show, which will be on Monday. Hopefully, I will have my co-host. I hope they're doing great wherever they're out, having fun in the world right now. So, thank you. Subscribe, share this video, and leave a comment below. Until next time, you guys, let me know what you enjoyed about this video tonight. I think it has been extra interesting, UFO. And I appreciate all you listeners. I mean, 3 hours and 30 minutes. We did good. I feel like I'm much more educated, but I've been kind of right about all of the things related to the cannabis industry in Colorado, early days prohibition, the addictions that went along our waterways of the Colorado River, pioneers coming in the town, selling off their properties, making quick grabs. So I feel like it's been a great night, but you guys have a great night, and I will talk to you all very soon. Bye.